Chapter 371. Fighting Arsonists. Michael absorbed all of this new information and felt the excitement of discovery fueling his veins. And if ChatJK4 had a body, he was sure that it would froth at the mouth at the chance of analyzing and discovering this new type of power called abilities. It would be for the betterment of everyone if you increased the Godforge pieces in your possession, ChatJK4 said. You and me both, buddy. But of course, the only source of Godforge pieces that he could get were all in the hands of conglomerates and trillionaires. He wasn't even sure if there were any Godforge pieces left. Maybe everything had been used by people to become magnetics. Boom! Boom! It was at that moment that two large explosions shook the entire lands of the fairy's pocket dimension. Michael closed his eyes and focused on the shadow clone. He left outside and saw the appearance of 10 orange-armored men setting the entire forest ablaze. Virion immediately floated outside of her house. The permanent dark skies of the pocket dimension were starting to lighten up. The illuminating trees and tentacle grass were cracking into pieces, letting out a bright white light. The entire pocket dimension was losing its stability. Who is doing this? Virion shouted in anger. Even the Mushroom King stomped his trunk-like feet on the ground, releasing some of its spores to try and repair the damage dealt in the forest. Where's Vivi? Where's everyone? Virion looked everywhere, but the entire village was like a ghost town. She was the only one left inside. I can explain, he said to her. He briefly talked about his deal with Vivi and the roller coasters, as well as the FlareCorp 10-man army that was coming over to speak with the fairies. That damn child, Virion cursed. She just does whatever she wants without thinking about our entire race as a whole. A magic circle flowed from Michael's feet up to his head as he slowly grew back to normal size. Don't worry, that's why I'm here. I'll deal with those guys for you, he said to her. The Mushroom King walked up next to him and puffed out 2 big breaths. It seemed eager and ready to fight against those humans. Thanks, buddy. But I can handle this myself. You just stay here and protect this village. Okay? It nodded its head and immediately stood its ground just outside the village. It reminded Michael of a very loyal dog, a complete opposite of what it was when he first met it. Virion looked worried about the damage to the pocket dimension. But Michael's presence calmed her down a lot. I would have said be careful, but with your powers and your diva, these humans have no chance against you. I just want you to be careful with the forest. No problem, he said as he raised his hand and turned the magical key. In an instant, Michael found himself back in reality. He stood there just meters away from the 10 arsonists that had come to ruin the entire forest just to lure the fairies out. They were using their flaming swords and exploding morning stars to wreak havoc upon nature. Their 5-star realm allowed the fire to persist despite the wetness of the region. Ha! Who are you? Finally, one of the soldiers noticed Michael standing in front of them. They were unnerved with the golden-haired boy that appeared out of nowhere. Then they wondered if he was a fairy. But the lack of wings and his large stature debunked that pretty quickly. Hey kid, what are you doing here? This is FlareCorp property. Get out of here now if you don't want to get caught up in the mess. Are you listening to us? Michael ignored them all and focused on the growing fire that continued to spread rapidly in the forest. Their fire spells took on a life of its own as it actively devoured plant life like a hungry beast. He could feel the power of 5-star mana inside of it. And the only way he was going to stop it was if he countered it with the element the complete opposite of fire. Water. He raised his hand up in the air, creating a small magic circle the same size as his hand. The FlareCorp soldiers immediately recognized the magic theory in his spell. That's not gonna work, kid. This is no ordinary fire. It can't be extinguished by a weak 1-star water ball spell. Stop interfering in our work or else we'll be forced to take you in. The magic circle continued to rotate an inch above his palm, ready to be cast. But he wasn't done yet. He poured in more mana from his body, creating a slightly larger magic circle above the already existing one. The soldier's eyes showed confusion and a little bit of ridicule. But then, another circle appeared on top of the other 2. Then another until there were now 5 magic circles stacked atop each other. with each one slightly bigger than the other. The difference in power was evident. Even though the magic theory was a simple water ball spell, the power it emanated was at the 5-star realm. Whoa! It was only now that the soldiers realized something was wrong. This was no ordinary boy. They gripped their flaming swords up, ready to attack him. But Michael had just finished his cast. The magic circles flattened to become one, creating a larger magic circle. And suddenly, whoosh! A large pillar of water exploded out of the large magic circle up towards the sky, creating a reverse waterfall. The soldiers looked up and started to feel droplets sprinkling on their faces. But then, the water reached its peak and started to go down. Their faces were now obscured by the large shadow of a tsunami coming down to devour them all. Some soldiers were smart enough to start running. But even that did not save them from the huge amount of water that crashed down onto the forest floor, taking everything with it and letting it flow outwards. The monstrous fire that was engulfing the entire forest screamed out in defiance as it saw the water coming towards it. But the water still extinguished it all the same. The 10-man Flare Corp army washed away almost 100 meters away from their original location. Their swords, their armor, and their clothes were soaking wet, destroying the inner fire that powered it. Cough! Cough! Who the hell is that kid? One soldier cursed. He picked up his sword and casted another fire spell, letting his sword burn aflame. Flames, are you all right? He asked the rest of his team. They all responded positively. They might have been wet, but they could still fight. Kid, you have made an enemy of Flare Corp, the soldier screamed. Michael slowly floated towards them with his hands behind his back. You were already my enemy, he replied. Then you will pay, the soldier said, raising his flaming sword towards him. The man started to become engulfed in flames, vaporizing the rest of the water on his body. Michael looked around him and saw all 10 soldiers repeating the same magic circle that the soldier created. Chain of the Fire Boar. A large chain of flames manifested around Michael. The individual power of their 5-star realms soon intertwined with each other, creating a connection that multiplied their strength. This was now a 6-star spell. With the chain slowly wrapping itself around him, and with the fire of a 6-star spell burning the air around him, Michael raised his hand and pointed it at one of the soldiers. Unity Gun. Chapter 372, Metal Slag. The Flare Corp soldiers were renowned for their teamwork and cooperation. They were specially trained to use their 5-star power and defeat those that were much stronger than them. And by their estimation, Michael was only a 5-star magician at best. Their 6-star chain of the Fire Boar could contain and burn someone like him. However, they felt something change in the air, felt heavier for some reason. Their eyes eventually moved towards Michael's hand, where his pointer finger glowed a bright white light as the power of unity gathered inside it. Above him, the apparition of the robotic, mechanical arm slowly appeared holding a silver deagle in its hand. The entire 10-man army of Flare Corp soldiers were stunned upon seeing this. The apparition was so unexpected that most of them ended up losing focus and breaking concentration on the 6-star spell. The fire chains broke off with sparks flickering and spreading in the air. Eventually, the fire lost its power and turned into nothingness, leaving Michael free. A diva. They had come from the main Flare Corp army. This was not the first time they had seen a diva in action. Their king and the superior officers below him all wielded this ancient and mysterious power that they could not comprehend. They knew the kind of power that a diva could possess. They thought that this kind of power was only reserved for those that had a royal blood like those born in the Oscorp family. They would have never thought that a random kid would also wield this power. Heck, they wouldn't have even believed it if they found out that Michael was part of the Reborn company. Being magnetic was a talent only those geniuses and with the right lineage could have. Michael raised his unity gun and pointed it at one of the soldiers. Tell me more about divas. Who has one in the Flare Corp army? He asked them plainly. The soldier flinched as they felt the full brunt of the diva's right hand pointed right towards him. Even if he didn't know what kind of metal contraption was in its hand, he knew that it held untold power. But despite the threat on his life, the soldier kept his mouth shut. "Soldiers! Attack him at once!" he shouted. The orange-armored men moved at the same time, raising their swords as it blazed with the power of fire mana. 3 soldiers thrusted their swords, creating a 5-star powered flaming bird at the tip of their blade. These 3 animals shot straight towards Michael, hoping to interrupt him from attacking. Michael shook his head. "I just wanted a simple answer." And with the flick of the trigger, he shot a minimum-powered unity gun towards the soldier he questioned. The beam of light almost instantaneously pierced through the soldier's orange chestplate and through the other side. The man fell to the floor in pain but otherwise in good health. The beam had cauterized the wound as it entered his body, making sure that he would not bleed out to death from the shot. Still, the man was in too much pain to continue fighting. He laid there, squirming, leaving only 9 other soldiers left for Michael to deal with. Just then, the 3 flaming swallowtail birds shot towards him, but not before being stopped by an invisible prismatic shield that hovered above his skin. The birds exploded into a fiery bomb as it crashed onto the Unity defense, but was soon cancelled out by the inherent power of the prismatic shield. Michael was invincible in the face of 5-star spells, but that didn't seem to be enough of a deterrent for these soldiers. The other 3 men performed synchronized swings with their swords, creating a flaming remnant in the air. "Trigonal hellfire!" they screamed. Their slashes coalesced as they crashed into each other, creating a pyramid shape that shot towards Michael at fast speeds. The pyramid crashed onto Michael's prismatic shield, once again exploding in a cloud of flames. But once these flames were extinguished with the power of unity in the shield, the other 3 soldiers appeared just a meter away from Michael, with their swords ready to reach him. Their tactics were sound. If magic couldn't penetrate Michael, then maybe their swords could. They thought they had finally gotten him. But just before the blades were about to reach Michael, 2 large magic circles appeared underneath the soles of his feet. Suddenly, a visible sound wave emanated from the magic circle, propelling Michael away from their swings. They tried to pursue him, creating flaming explosions on their feet for an instantaneous speed boost. But as soon as those visible sound waves reached their feet, the fire was suddenly extinguished into a withering wisp. "How?" "That's a physics lesson for you," Michael said to them. Low-frequency sound waves could extinguish fires just as well as water. ChatJK4 told him that. He raised his hand again, powering up the Unity gun on the tip of his finger. "I don't want to do this, but you leave me no choice," he said, pulling the trigger. The beam shot right towards one of the soldiers, incapacitating him immediately. He didn't waste any more time and powered up another shot. The tip of his finger once more glowed with the power of unity. Just as Michael was doing that, a soldier successfully positioned himself behind him. He bent his body low before exploding towards Michael with a fiery flame. Michael pulled the trigger, and suddenly, the soldier behind him felt a searing pain just below his ribcage. The man looked down and saw a gaping hole in his FlareCorp armor, brought on by the Unity gun. He looked up and saw Michael's hand bend backwards, with his fingers still smoking from the shot. 3 down, 7 more to go, Michael thought. He was having the time of his life, but the soldiers were pressed and stressed. Seeing their comrades go down with 1 shot was a sobering image. They released any and all kinds of magic spells that they could conjure in an attempt to break through Michael's impenetrable shell. But no matter what they did, their fire was unable to burn through the invisible prismatic shield. It continued to eat away at any fire that they created. Michael's finger glowed a blinding light before he released a shot, taking down another soldier. But these men couldn't give up. 2 of them rushed towards Michael with nothing but their swordplay. They lunged their swords at different sides, forcing Michael to retreat a step back. He raised his hand, about to pull off another Unity gun. Shot before a soldier appeared from under him and swung his sword upwards, threatening to cut his arm off. Michael redirected his aim, shooting the sword instead. It immediately flew off the soldier's grip, with the blade completely pulverized into nothing but mere slag upon impact. The soldiers took this chance and rushed at Michael with their swords. The only way they could fight against him was during his reloading shot, the few seconds after Michael shot off his Unity gun, and needed his mana to replenish. This is so inefficient, Michael thought to himself. Just as he said that, he suddenly felt something move. He looked down and saw the molten slag from the broken sword in the ground still cooling off after being shot by the Unity gun. Then it twitched. By the very slightest of movements, the molten metal slag moved. He didn't do that. None of the soldiers did that. Chapter 373, Wanting to Shoot More Stars. Michael felt entwined with the molten slag. He felt a hidden connection with it, something that didn't seem to be entirely physical. There wasn't even a string of mana that controlled it. It was something else. Just a little more, he thought to himself. With just a little bit more effort, he felt like he could control the metal slag telekinetically without the use of his mana. Unfortunately, the 6 remaining soldiers did not let him take his eyes off the battlefield for even a second. 3 soldiers came at him from all sides, performing their Flare Corp-specific swordplay that focused on power and explosiveness. Their swings were wide and their powers were enough to leave a large gash on the ground even without contact. Michael raised his hand, creating a magic circle underneath his feet. Just before the moment the swords were about to hit him, lightning struck the earth from high up to the heavens. The explosion sent the 3 soldiers flying outwards. They crashed onto the trees, with their skins still smoking and feeling bare from the electricity that surged through their bodies. When they tried to recover, their muscles refused to move, with Michael's spell leaving them paralyzed for a few seconds. A blinding light appeared in Michael's finger as he shot another soldier in his stomach, leaving only 5 enemies left. And before he could celebrate, the other 3 soldiers ran outwards towards a tree, using their momentum to climb up towards its branches before diving down towards Michael. Magic circles appeared on their bodies, enhancing their physical capabilities to its maximum. Fire surrounded their whole bodies, with the wind suddenly picking up and creating miniature fire tornadoes on their bodies. This was a very smart play by the soldiers. If Michael used water to put out the fire, then the wind from the tornado would repel the water and empower the fire. If Michael used earth to put out the tornado, then the fire would scorch the element, turning it into ashes. For a normal magician, this would be a bad matchup. But of course, Michael was no ordinary magician. Michael raised his hand, creating a magic circle above his palms. As the mana flowed outwards, a violet sludge with the same consistency as slime burst forth. Just as the 3 fire tornadoes converged at his location, Michael flung the violet sludge around him, creating a protective sphere. As the fire and air clashed with this violet liquid, its intensity began to wither off. The flames began to die down, eventually turning into nothing but a whispering flame. The tornado lost its power, reduced to a mere gentle breeze. The 3 soldiers were caught stunned as they landed next to Michael, completely vulnerable. They didn't understand what happened. The truth was that Michael used a very complicated 5-star poison spell called Withering Elements. After all, the poison element wasn't just a simple poison that humans were familiar with. It was the concept of decay, degradation, and rotting. That was how the fire and air elements lost their power. Michael raised his hand, Unity gun loaded, and fired at another soldier, reducing their numbers to just 4 remaining. The soldiers forced themselves up, with their bodies exhausted and almost running out of mana. They didn't know how Michael continued to cast spell after spell without getting tired. In their last-ditch effort, they rushed all together, creating another combination spell. "Eternal Cross of the Flame!" they shouted. The soldiers began to perform their sword stances as they slowly rotated around Michael. They swung their swords and lunged, dragging their feet to create a specific indentation in the ground. As they created a circle, a large fire erupted underneath their feet, creating a wall of flame that trapped Michael inside. Suddenly, these soldiers disappeared within the wall of fire, becoming nothing but meteor-like flames that swam across the entrapment. One of the meteors shot towards Michael, and once he looked closely, he saw the figure of a blade at the tip of the meteor, intending to skewer him upon impact. But of course, a prismatic shield appeared above Michael's skin and deflected the flaming meteor. Unfortunately, it simply returned back into the wall of flames, replenishing the fire that it lost upon impact. Then, Another meteor crashed towards Michael before another, then another, then another. These 4 meteors were relentless in their pursuit to break through Michael's Unity defense. Unfortunately for them, it stood tall with no sign of cracking. Michael powered up another Unity gun in his finger, raising it up and aiming it at the blazing meteors that crashed towards him. Their movements were erratic, making it hard for him to focus on aiming. Thankfully, he had ChatJK4 by his side. I have uploaded an automatic homing system in your visual cortex. Just then, Michael saw a game-like interface appear in his vision, where a crosshair appeared in a specific area where the meteor would be in a few seconds. He aimed, waiting for the right timing before triggering the shot. At the exact same moment that the beam left his finger, Michael felt a subconscious urge in his mind. It was one of those thoughts that were instantaneous and didn't really have an exact sentence that popped up into his head. It was simply a connection of ideas, the firing of neurons in his brain. And in that moment, the metal slag in the ground once again twitched. But this time, its movement allowed it to skip at least an inch from its original position. Michael felt it. He knew that he was the one who made this metal slag move. He just didn't know how or why. The Unity gun shot off, accurately hitting one of the meteors. The flames sputtered off before revealing the soldier behind it. The man crashed out of the formation, incapacitated from the shot. 3 more remaining. And as the meteors continued to barrage his Unity defense, he kept trying to replicate the feeling he had just now. Yet no matter what he did, he was unable to make the metal slag move even a microscopic inch. Maybe, I need to use my Unity gun, he thought to himself. So he raised his hand and powered up another shot. After a few seconds, he moved his hand to an empty spot to the right and fired off the beam, accurately hitting one of the meteors as it moved randomly. In that exact moment, Michael felt something. The metal slag moved again. It wasn't as strong as the one before, but he was still able to make it move just a tiny bit. He didn't waste more time and fired off another Unity gun shot, accurately hitting another meteor. And there it was again. The metal slag moved. As he continued this process, he felt ever more closer to becoming more in tune with that strange feeling in his heart. He felt like if he did it just a few more, he could somehow control the metal slag with only his mind. Spurred on by this need, Michael fired off another shot, hitting the very last meteor in the formation. Just a little bit more, Michael said. But as he looked around, there were no more meteors left. The entire 10-man Flare Corp army was defeated. No, Michael said, almost kicking the ground angrily. Chapter 374. What? Michael raised his hand, firing off a Unity gun shot in the air. But unfortunately, the metal slag refused to move. The adrenaline from the fight had completely worn off as he defeated the last of the soldiers. I was so close, he muttered. This was probably the first time that he was angry that there weren't more enemies to defeat. He plopped onto the ground, sitting in the forest with 10 Flare Corp soldiers lying unconscious on the floor. Just then, a bright light manifested in the air right next to him before pop. The light transformed into the figure of an old but spry fairy with violet hair. Virion looked around the forest and saw burn marks on the ground, with scorched trees and bushes in a 30-meter radius around Michael. It was thanks to him that the fire was only contained in such a small area, or else their pocket dimension would have turned unstable. Despite the victory, Michael didn't seem to be all that happy with the result. Thank you for your service, she said to him. It must have not been easy dealing with 10 well-trained soldiers at once. She tried to console him, but it seemed to have done the exact opposite. Why didn't they send 20? Michael cursed the heavens. Confused, Virion asked what happened. It's that, he said, pointing to an irregularly shaped metal ball on the ground made from a molten steel blade. I almost felt my abilities awaken. The only explanation to that phenomenon was that it was an ability. Telekinesis was a very common type of spell in the world. However, it always necessitated a magic circle and mana to accomplish. That was the physics of this world. However, he was able to move that metal slag even without any sort of mana from his body. He would have seen it, he would have felt it if mana made that metal move. But it didn't. The fact that it was only activated once he started shooting his Unity gun owed more to this fact. That's. Virion wanted to say that that wasn't possible. Awakening an ability despite being only in the first stage of body formation was supposed to be impossible. Even the genius humans couldn't achieve that. But then she remembered that Michael was a natural magnetic. Normal rules didn't apply to him. It could be your ability starting to awaken, she said, nodding her head. Was there anything specific about it? Was there a special power? Michael shook his head.
No.
My control over the metal slag was so brief that I couldn't really get a grasp on why it was moving. But if I had more practice, I feel like I could have figured it out. Virion started to put things together. It must have been the pressure of battle that allowed you to slowly awaken your ability. But you said that you only felt it once you used your Unity gun skill, right? I wonder why you didn't feel it before and only now. It may be possible that the mere fact that you were made aware of abilities and divas made you subconsciously more in tune with your new power. ChatJK explained. Either way, I suggest you keep trying to understand your ability. Practice is your best bet. But if you don't want to go through all that trouble, obtaining more Godforge pieces will streamline that whole process. Michael nodded, keeping a note of it. And about your roller coaster, I can only say that I am extremely grateful for your help. Once it is done, it will provide a constant flow of nourishment for us fairies. It's a huge load of relief. No problem, he replied. I've always wanted to build a roller coaster. I'm glad it would help you fairies. Virion coughed, clearing her throat. I'm sure that my unruly daughter hasn't thanked you yet, so on behalf of all fairies, I thank you. To show my gratitude, I am willing to reveal to you a secret that us fairies have kept for a long time. We have a Godforge piece in our possession. Michael perked up. Really? Yes. Virion nodded. All major rulers of the world have at least a piece of it in their possession. The Ocean King, the Draconic Queen, the Monster Queen. All of them. Of course, even our own Pixie Queen is in possession of one. Though our share of the pieces are much fewer than the rest. I would be willing to part with ours as thanks. Michael was stunned. Really? You'll give it to me just like that? Yes, but I have just one condition. Let us relocate to your nation of Reborn. The Godforge piece in our possession is what helps stabilize our pocket dimension. If I were to give it to you, we would lose our home. So, as long as you give us our own place in the parched lands, then I am willing to pass our piece on to you. He didn't even hesitate and immediately nodded his head. Of course. You're really giving it to me? You're helping the entire fairy race with the roller coaster. And on a personal note, I am really grateful that you stopped these humans from burning down the forest and destroying our sanctuary. If it weren't for you, we may have been done for. What are you talking about? You could have dealt with them all on your own, he said to her. You're the Pixie Queen. Virion looked at Michael and shook her head. I'm not the Pixie Queen, she said, almost chuckling. The Pixie Queen is the embodiment of what makes a fairy. A fairy. She is our protector, our strongest savior. I'm just an old woman barely able to fly. But who? As Michael said that, a premonition flashed in his mind.
No.
He muttered, starting to realize the truth that had been in front of him the whole time. Even though she's very much an immature troublemaker, Vivi is our Pixie Queen, Virion revealed. And whether I like it or not, us fairies all have to follow her decision. The sound of glass shattering echoed inside Michael's head. The supposed image he had in his head of the Pixie Queen couldn't coincide with the picture of Vivi no matter what he tried. She's the Pixie Queen. That can't be. In hindsight, there were a lot of clues that would have led Michael to this discovery. The fact that she could command the entire village of fairies to move out of the forest and into the unknown parched lands should have been the first clue. And when they first met, she was the one who noticed him in the village even when he concealed his entire presence with no mana leakage. It seemed that there was a camouflage technique that could fool even his supreme talent in magic, her personality. If she had acted more like Virion, he would have immediately been suspicious of her true identity. But instead, she acted like a spoiled brat, throwing Michael off. How was he supposed to know? The Pixie Queen was supposed to be in the same league as the King of the Ocean. Chapter 375. Progressing a Diva. "I'm not sure how to feel about this," Michael said, massaging the crease on his forehead. Knowing this information would have dampened his spirits. Just then, Virion said something that he really wanted to hear. "Do you want to see the Godforge piece?" Of course, he nodded his head like an eager dog and followed Virion back to the pocket dimension. As he transported himself to the territory of the fairies, he saw a few scorched trees and destroyed tentacles. The battle with the Flarecorp army certainly did a number on the environment, but thankfully, it didn't affect much of the fairies' village. The Mushroom King sat on the outskirts, its spores wiggling, as it waited for Virion to return. Once she patted its red-spotted cap, the Mushroom King gleefully let out spores that glittered like gold. "Thankfully, Vivi's friend here stopped the fire from doing much damage," Virion commented. Michael still found it hard to believe that Vivi could create or even command a 7-star creature such as the Mushroom King. In his eyes, it was a pet, and Vivi was the troublemaker kid that always accompanied it. The Godforge piece is located at the very center of this pocket dimension, directly underneath my house. Virion floated over her own house, letting her wings flutter and release golden dust-like particles that surrounded the entire mushroom house. Eventually, a golden aura overcame the entire structure before the ground underneath it started to rumble. A few seconds later, her house lifted off the ground, floating slowly upwards. "So this is the infamous fairy's dust," Michael said in wonder. Thanks to his mastery of mana, he figured out that the golden dust was just a collection of bunched-up mana that created a magic spell. Basically, it was a levitation skill. And as the mushroom's roots were plucked out of the ground, the soil was disturbed enough to reveal a white fire that, strangely enough, didn't burn any of its surroundings. "This is what we call the eternal flame," Virion said, the flame's lights flickering on her face. "We believe that it was what helped us preserve our sanctuary here in the forest. Our ancestors and the ones before them all told us to protect and preserve the fairy race through all means possible. Most of us thought that it meant protecting this pocket dimension, this Godforge piece. But our fateful meeting with you made me realize that preserving our fairy race doesn't mean staying in place. It could also mean going with the flow of the times. Humanity is at an upheaval. I could feel it even here in the pocket dimension. The status quo is slowly changing, and that could spell trouble for us. If you hadn't met us, we would have certainly been forced to ally with those other humans. I believe that siding with you not just protects our race in the coming change, but also progresses it. I present to you our Godforge piece." Michael floated towards the raging white fire buried in the ground. As he came closer and closer, he saw a metallic shine peeking out from the unearthed soil. Badump, badump. He felt his heart start to stir, or more superficially, the Godforce piece in his heart. It sensed its own kind. "I'm sorry, but the pieces in our possession are small compared to what other species hold. But it will still allow you to transcend 2 stages of your diva," Virion warned. Michael raised his hand and let the natural attraction, or magnetism, he felt from the Godforce piece pull him in. Finally, his palm passed through the raging white fire. The flame erupted even more as he made contact, challenging him to see if he was worthy. This fire could burn through anything. But then, a prismatic shield appeared above his skin and repelled the white fire, allowing him to move closer. It flickered for a second, as if surprised. The absolute unity defense in his hand was familiar, complementary to its own flame. At that moment, the ground shook. The metallic piece started to unbury itself from the loose soil. The Godforge piece was starting to unearth itself as it rushed towards Michael's side. Finally, it shot off almost instantaneously to his heart, flinging Michael backwards until he landed on the Mushroom King's embrace. He looked down, seeing no wound nor entry point as the Godforge piece entered his body. But he felt it. It bypassed his skin and his organs until it found a place near the 2 upper valves of his heart. Then it met the old Godforge piece sticking to his heart. The 2 paused for a moment before they clicked together like a puzzle piece. They were like long-lost brothers, finally having a reunion in Michael's heart. Michael thought that that was it. But then, the two Godforge pieces surged with unprecedented power. It was a foreign power that not even his mastery of mana could resist. His diva manifested above him. The mechanical, robotic arm held nothing but a clenched fist. As he felt the power pulsating from the Godforge pieces, the diva above him started to move. Virion clenched her hands together as she saw the disembodied hand start to grow. More of its robotic structure was starting to be revealed, from the wrist going up to the elbow. As it reached the joint, the growth stopped. Eventually, his diva shimmered out of existence. Finally, Michael felt the power subside. He clenched his heart, which was slowly starting to beat slower to its normal rhythm. He took deep breaths, trying to recenter himself. He found that performing mana gathering helped with the recovery. Ha! As he returned to normal, he looked at his hands and felt different. Somehow, he could feel the presence of his diva even if it wasn't above him. Not only that, but he was starting to have a sense of the new power or ability that he was about to awaken. It was like gaining a new arm. Except, this arm was still numb and something that he was still unable to control. But still, it was a huge difference from before. Back then, he couldn't even feel his ability. He felt like he could make that metal slag move now if he wanted to. Despite thinking that he was able to make good progress, Virion thought differently. That's it. You were supposed to transcend to the third stage of body formation with that Godforge piece. But you're still at the first stage. Michael closed his eyes and saw his diva's presence. It had grown significantly, but not enough to form a full arm. You were supposed to grow your arm and a little bit of your chest. But instead, you've just progressed maybe halfway to the second stage. Maybe natural magnetics like me need more Godforge pieces to cultivate. Virion was in deep thought. In her mind, that wasn't likely. But maybe her knowledge about natural magnetics wasn't as deep as she thought. I don't know. But from this, it looks like you'll need to put twice as much effort than a normal magnetic to advance through the stages. Michael was bummed with that, but there was no choice. He was just thankful that he was able to progress his diva even by a little bit. At least now, he can try and awaken his ability. Chapter 376. Virtual Training. You have to concentrate now, Virion said, buzzing around Michael's face. The surge of power that you feel inside you is what will help you awaken your ability. He looked down at his chest and saw the new Godforge start to settle into his heart. It was squirming, trying to find the perfect position to settle into. This was what gave Michael a surge of power that was pushing him to the brink of awakening. Focus. Your ability is something that is innate within yourself. It is something that you know you specialize in, Virion said, acting like the voice of reason beside him. Michael closed his eyes and concentrated. He thought about what he was thinking during the time when he felt the metal slag twitch. I was thinking about the Unity gun, he thought to himself. I thought it was inefficient. I didn't want to reload each time I shot my gun. Since he modeled it after a pistol, the rate of fire of his weapon was very slow. Each time he loaded a gun in his fingers, he had to put all 8 mana from his body and crushed it together, creating the bullet and the explosion that propelled it. And in the heat of battle, his subconscious tried to solve his own problem and started to awaken his ability. He let his imagination run wild. He started to relive the moment where he was surrounded by the Flare Corps soldiers with his own life in the line. Creating a virtual reality simulator inside your mind, ChatJK4 uploaded a series of codes inside his mind, allowing him to see a virtual reality of the forest inside his mind. This forest was the same exact one that he was at. There was even burned grass and toppled trees all around, making it look like a complete replica of the original one. Then, 10 Flare Corps soldiers flickered into reality right in front of him. They stood in place, completely frozen in time. They looked so real that he could even see the mana signatures in their body. He wouldn't be surprised if they could perform real magic spells just like a real person, thanks to ChatJK4's magic theory analysis. How realistic do you want this to be? Please rate it from 1 to 10. A solid 8, maybe? Understood. And just like in a video game, Michael saw a countdown appear in his vision. Starting simulation in 3, 2, 1. As soon as the green go appeared in front of him, the 10 Flare Corps soldiers burst into life. "Attack him!" one of the soldiers shouted. Michael stared in wonder at ChatJK4's realistic simulation. If he didn't know any better, then he would have thought that this was real and not a visual illusion inside his mind. 3 soldiers swung their flaming swords at him, creating fiery hummingbirds that dove towards him. He stayed still, thinking that his absolute unity defense would activate. But surprisingly, it never did. The birds crashed into him, creating an explosion of fire that sent him flying outwards and crashing into a tree. Cough! Cough! He looked down and saw his clothes tattered and burned. Beyond that, his skin was also caught up from the explosion, injuring him with second-degree burns. The pain he felt was real, though he guessed that ChatJK4 turned it down a bit since he said that he only wanted an 8/10 in the realistic setting. This was the first time that he had ever been seriously hurt after his reincarnation. "Would you like me to reactivate your security defenses?" ChatJK4 asked. "No need. I need the real thrill of the fight for me to awaken my ability." Just as he thought that, all 10 soldiers rushed at him without giving him a second of reprieve. They brought out all their biggest fiery spells, hunting him down at any chance he got. Without his absolute unity defense, he was forced to be a lot more proactive in his defense, using large water walls to deny their flaming swords. Flight also became his best friend, as he used it constantly to dodge coordinated attacks that would have gotten him if he was stuck grounded. Finally, he had enough and raised his hand, creating a finger gun shape. As the power of unity flowed to his pointy finger, one of the soldiers thrusted his swords at him, with a rotating fire disc that surrounded his blade. Just as he was about to be hit, Michael pulled the trigger, shooting the blade and the soldier in one bullet. The soldier froze for a second and disintegrated into blocky pixels. Before he could even get another shot off, the other 8 soldiers converged at his location, swinging their weapons in all directions. Michael turned himself into a shadow, bypassing all their attacks and escaping their enclosure. As the soldiers turned around to look for him, a beam of unity power shot from above the trees, directly hitting one of the soldiers and disintegrating him into mere pixels. They didn't mourn for their fallen brother and rushed upwards, flinging flaming spells in his direction. Unfortunately for them, Michael disappeared into the shadows yet again, nowhere to be seen. He continued this pattern, hiding from the shadows and only shooting his unity gun. Once he was out of their periphery. Eventually, he killed half of them without much effort. His endless mana and endless variety of magic spells allowed him to easily triumph over these 5-star soldiers despite losing his absolute unity defense. It would only be a matter of time until he defeated all of them yet again. Unfortunately, this virtual fight did nothing to help awaken his ability. ChatJK4, I need something a little bit more challenging. Understood. Ramping up the difficulty of the simulation 3, 2, 1. The fight started yet again. The remaining 5 soldiers looked at Michael with a gleam in their eyes. Something felt different about them. He transformed himself into a shadow, retreating into the recesses of a tree, and waited for the perfect time to show up and shoot one of them with the unity gun. Just then, all 5 soldiers turned to look directly at him, despite being in shadow form. Not only that, but they transformed into a shadow as well, chasing him through the forest at breakneck speeds. "What the hell?" Michael muttered. As the 5 soldiers chased after him, weaving through trees in their shadow form, Michael suddenly teleported out and behind them, with his hand raised for a shot. He pulled the trigger and the beam shot right to where he was aiming at. But surprisingly, the soldiers all teleported away at the very exact moment of the trigger, evading the near-instantaneous shot. They reappeared behind him, swinging their swords as they lunged at him. Each of them displayed a different set of elemental power. One had lightning, one had water, one had air, one had earth, and one had dark/shadow spells. As his unity gun reloaded, Michael raised his hand and created 5 different magic circles around him. Each one created a simple wall made out of the element that would counter the specific spell that the Flare Corps soldiers used. His defense proved fruitful as he deflected their attacks and even counterattacked at the moment that their swords missed the attack. A flurry of elemental bullets rained down on the soldiers. But as they were about to hit them, a prismatic shield appeared around them, nullifying Michael's spell. Chapter 377, Hard Battle. Michael didn't expect them to even wield a unity defense. "You're kidding around," he muttered in the air, addressing ChatJK4. The soldiers then reached down onto their shadows on the ground and retrieved a new sword from it. These weapons glowed with power, something that Michael was extremely familiar with. In the moment they wielded it in their hands, their cultivations soared into the next star realm, pushing them to 6-star fighters. These were none other than mithril artifacts. But then his surprise didn't end there. They then reached down into their pockets and took something small and spherical. Michael realized it immediately. Those were 35% concentrated chocolate pellets. Once the soldiers swallowed these snacks, their powers surged, almost reaching the 7-star realm, only a half-step below it. As it turned out, the highest difficulty setting that ChatJK4 could create was just him fighting a normal Rebornian soldier. "I guess I reap what I sow," he said. He took out his own chocolate pellet from his pocket and consumed it in one go. Power coursed through his veins, reaching even greater heights than normal. Thanks to his superior sugar rush skill, just one pellet was enough to push him to the Flare Corps soldiers' level, making the battle even. He floated in the air and raised his unity gun towards them, ready to fight. They raised their mithril artifacts and took their stances. And so started the toughest battle that Michael had ever experienced in both of his lifetimes, including battles he had seen in anime and media. He truly realized now how much of a threat his own Rebornians were on the battlefield. Their power to control all 8 elements, their unity defense, their mithril relics, their sugar rush was a nightmare to defend against. Everything amped up their skills to the max and even beyond that. And with ChatJK4 controlling all of these soldiers, their powers were efficiently used with the best tactics and attack patterns that Michael had ever seen. They were bombarding him with the most unique and creative spells that were casted with extreme precision and accuracy. He would concentrate on defending himself against their attacks before finding a small gap in their defenses, allowing him to use his unity gun. But even then, his shot would only destroy their lesser unity defense that would regenerate after 1 minute. So, he had to take 2 shots in close succession in order to defeat one soldier. So far, he had yet to defeat a single one. Ha-ha! Michael breathed heavily as he looked up at all 5 Flare Corps soldiers floating in the air. His clothes were tattered, messy, and bloodied. Fighting 5 soldiers with the powers of ChatJK4 was almost certainly a Herculean task. This was the first time that he felt that he would lose in a battle. Every spell he used they could counter, and every time he tried to escape from them, they would find him. The only way he could injure them was through his unity gun. Yet the limitation of only being able to shoot 1 bullet at a time was a serious deterrent that left him unable to seriously wound them. Their lesser unity defense would always regenerate before he could hit them with another clean shot. Each of the 5 soldiers raised their swords up in the air, conjuring large magic spells that emanated the power of a peak 6-star spell. Eventually, mana erupted out of the tip of their blades, forming into a large snake-like dragon that swam through the air like water. All 5 dragons were made out of different elements: water, earth, fire, air, and lightning. They soared through the heavens, asserting their dominance in the air. Their tails left behind a stream of mana, creating a circular formation in the middle of the skies. Michael felt the wind blow in their direction, picking up in speed as the mana gathered around the formation. Eventually, the dragons crashed through each other, with their elements combining and creating an even bigger dragon that incorporated all 5 elements. As it reached its full length, the dragon looked down at Michael, ready to finish the job. Michael knew that this could be the end. Fatigue, exhaustion, and coupled with the fact that he had been fighting these soldiers for hours on end, made him completely forget that this was only a virtual simulation. Nothing was real. Even his pain was only an illusion made by ChatJK4 to make it look real. But still, Michael felt the pressure of life and death on his hands. He felt that if he didn't defend himself against this large dragon, this could spell the end for him. Even his unity gun seemed wholly ineffective against a behemoth this large. and it certainly wouldn't be able to defeat the 5 soldiers that created it. But it was his only choice. Rorgurk, the large dragon, made out of equal parts air, water, earth, fire, and lightning, broke through the large cumulonimbus cloud in the skies and surged towards Michael. Its power was immense, unrooting trees and destroying the forest from the mere wind that was created by the dragon. It dived down towards Michael, its jaws roaring as it opened to consume him. Michael raised his hand, with the power of unity gathering at his fingertips. In this moment, where all seemed lost, Michael felt his heart pump with power. It was beating irregularly, with the Godforge pieces inside it starting to dance with intensity. He could feel this new power start to course through his veins. If unity power was as hot as boiling water, then this new power, this ability, was as cool as ice. It was the exact opposite of mana. Meanwhile, in the real world, Virion watched from the sidelines as Michael stood in place with his eyes closed. From her perspective, he had only been doing this for a few minutes at most. But for Michael, hours had gone by. Still, at this very moment, she suddenly felt a change in her surroundings. It felt like the leaves on the trees were rustling, even without the presence of wind. Felt like she heard water sloshing, even without a river nearby. Eventually, the mechanical robotic hand shimmered above Michael. This diva was only up to its elbow, still incomplete. The diva was starting to move, like an ancient monster awakening from its deep slumber. Virion held her breath, watching everything unfold, hoping that she wouldn't disturb Michael from whatever he was doing. She didn't know how, but he was starting to get a grasp of his diva even though he was only in the first stage of body formation. The fact that he was able to manifest it without using his unity gun meant that he had progressed faster than she had even thought. Usually, a diva or an ability would only awaken through practice or through combat, but Michael was doing it just by standing still. But still, this wasn't enough for him to awaken his ability. Usually, a person's natural talent would only awaken through a trial of life or death. This would allow them to push through their limitations, transcending the normal. So, she thought that Michael would need more than this to awaken his ability. Just then, the metal slag behind her started to levitate upwards. Chapter 378, Bandit's Final Stand. Meanwhile, out in the battlefield, the two teams continued to catch bandit after bandit without stopping. Eventually, they scoured the forest and found no other bandits scattered about. Whatever's left of them were hiding back in their cave, taking their last stand. Jakku, Zion, Fudge, and Grieve all stood in front of a cave closed off by a large boulder. They could sense a lot of activity inside, probably from the bandits who had gone into hiding. "I'll blast that large boulder into pieces. Just wait," Zion said, winding up his arm ready to bust inside the cave. Jakku stopped him just in time. "We can't. Boss isn't here yet. But we could end up losing the game. We need to score more bandits," Zion argued. "Bro Mike already told us to win at all costs. He also can't afford to lose this game. We have to go inside before." Just as he said that, they heard the sound of grass rustling just beside them. Eventually, they saw their worst enemies, the girls' team. "Too scared to go inside?" Shiina asked, with the other girls chuckling with each other. "No, we aren't. And we got here first. We got dibs," Zion asserted. "Yep, we got dibs," Fudge backed him up. Then why aren't you going inside?" Omisu spoke up, with Shiina nodding in approval. "We're waiting for Master," Fudge said, standing his ground. "Where did my little boy go?" Lilia asked. "Fudge dear, would you mind telling me where he is?" "Of course. Master is currently in the forest." But before he could talk, Zion and Jakku both grabbed Fudge's head and stopped him from revealing more information. "Boss is on a top-secret mission," Jakku said. "Yeah, he's off to fight more bandits," Zion added. "Suspicious." Yuna looked at the Dragonborns and glared at them, making them feel the pressure. "Grieve, will you tell us where Michael is?" The skeleton general laughed. "Ho-ho, of course. He's... I seem to have forgotten ho-ho-ho. Either way, you all should stand aside and let us enter the cave, Shiina proposed. We'll be taking home the win because of this, she gloated. Oh no you don't. Zion was just about ready to battle it out, when all of a sudden, they saw the shadows converge to their location. The shadow orcs appeared all around the forest, kneeling down as a sign of respect for the higher-ranking officers of Reborn. Eventually, the two orc chieftains appeared in the middle of the two teams. Naruto addressed the boys' team, and Sasuke addressed the girls' team. Bu-Tutu, we have finished scouring the entire forest region and have found no other bandit left behind, Naruto said, slamming his chest.
Rahtata.
As per the boss orders, the entire Reborn army has come to help in the upcoming raid of the bastard bandits' hideout. As weak as I may be, we are also called on to help. Everyone turned to look to the side and saw Sleazy and a couple of other prisoners wearing orange jumpsuits. The Dragonborns even recognized some of them as they were all bandits who had converted to become loyal Rebornians upon visiting the nation of Reborn back in the parched lands. And they weren't the only ones coming from the King's region. The sound of hooves clopping on the ground reverberated through the forest. Finally, these large and burly centaurs skidded to a stop as soon as they reached their destination. On top of them were these red hobmankeys with mithril artifact javelins on their hands. Golden Road State Troopers, reporting for duty, one of the red hobmankeys said, saluting to everyone. Although they were small in numbers, their combined strength far made up for that fact. They were more than enough to be the main vanguard for the assault, especially since they would have a really overpowered support group just behind them. The Shadow Orcs used their shadow ability to teleport these Rebornian musicians, holding their mithril artifact instruments by their side. Most of them played a percussion instrument, perfect for hyping up the army from afar as their beats traveled through the air and through the ground. This was the entire Rebornian army for now. It was even a little bit overkill, to be honest. But Michael simply wanted to test out the strength of their army against some pretty good opponents. It also served as good practice for them, especially implementing the musicians on the back line. Zion looked at all their support and whispered to Jaku. If they defeat the bandits, then who would get their points? That was a very serious question that no one had an answer for. Obviously, they'll count towards our team, right? Fudge argued. They are Master's subordinates after all. Wait just a second there. I'm Michael's mother, which means that I have the same amount of authority as my son. Their points should go towards our team. No. The two teams were in an argument, unable to settle the score. It was at that moment where their conversation was suddenly interrupted by an earthquake from the ground. They all looked towards the boulder blocking the cave's entrance before. Boom! The boulder exploded into a million pieces, with large speeding rocks being flung all over the place with anyone in its close proximity being vulnerable to the blast. Bandits suddenly flooded out of the cave, numbering in the hundreds. They rushed out of the cave with manic looks on their faces, ready to live or die by this encounter. They all thought that they would get the advantage from the explosion, as surely the blast would have affected some of the Rebornians. However, they didn't know that a prismatic shield deflected any incoming projectiles away from their bodies, leaving them virtually unharmed by the explosion. Charge! This is a fight for our lives, bastards! One of the bandits shouted. Either we kill them, we get killed. About 400 bandits raised their knives in the air and shouted at their comrades' words. They were the only ones left from their group. This was their last stand. If they didn't drive off these Rebornians, then they would get killed by Blazel and her elite group of Flare Corps soldiers. Although they were outnumbered, the Rebornians didn't panic at all. Instead, the Dragonborns became even more ecstatic. Free points, Zion shouted, bumping his gauntlets together. Not if we get to them first, Shiina replied, loading an arrow in her bow. As the large surge of bandits rushed towards them, both the boys and the girls' team used this chance to release their strongest attacks, choosing to defeat as many bandits as possible. Zion jumped up in the air, with his gauntlets glowing with a dark and purple color. As the horde of bandits ran towards him, Zion punched downwards, creating a large crack in the very space below. This crack propagated down before eventually reaching the bandits. Despite them using their own 4-star spells to protect themselves, they found themselves getting blasted off in the air as Zion's punch created an explosion in the ground, affecting tens of bandits just from the hit alone. Chapter 379. Bandits Surrender. Zion put the fear in each of the bandits' eyes as soon as his single punch defeated 20 of their comrades. As the red-scaled dragonborn landed on the ground, the bandits stopped running and kept their distance away from him. But still, Zion actively sought them out and relentlessly released his devastating punches, sending about 50 bandits flying in the air within just a few jabs. And despite being lazy, Jakku didn't fall behind either. As the bandits rushed towards him with their 4-star spells and their knives, Jakku calmly unsheathed his sword. Blue lightning sizzled around his body as he turned into pure electricity, as a horizontal lightning strike struck the bandits coming towards him. A line of about 20 bandits stood frozen as they got hit by the blue lightning, before they eventually collapsed on the ground, with their skins still steaming. Show-offs, Shiina scoffed as she saw her 2 brothers showcase their powers. They might need all that fancy skills to defeat bandits, but all she needed was a few well-placed arrows. She notched an arrow in her bow before closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. And then, a flash of inspiration hit her as she released her shot, with her arrow finding the perfect line of bandits. The arrow hit one of the bandits directly in his chest, flinging him back towards another bandit, which continued on until 8 bandits found themselves skewered by the arrow. Shiina calmly released arrow after arrow, hitting many combo shots in the process. Standing by her side was Amisu, who had been swinging her spear at any bandit that dared to try and come close to her sister. Shiina had become the subject of the bandits after they saw her defeat tens of their comrades through every arrow. Amisu's spear gathered the momentum of wind, with each swing creating a large gust that propelled any bandit away from their location. Anyone unlucky enough to be caught in the wind would feel their ribs broken even without her spear hitting them. Off to the side, Yuna wasn't doing bad herself. Her rapier danced with Amisu's wind, becoming almost unpredictable as her blade curved with each swing. Unlike these dragonborns, Yuna faced her opponents one by one, and each one, she was able to disarm them and defeat them with just one single thrust of her rapier. She almost looked like she was a ballerina as she twirled around in the battlefield. But make no mistake, she was just as lethal as the dragonborns when it came to defeating bandits. Now, the 2 strongest fighters in the group were Grieve and Lilia. Lilia conjured great vines in the ground that could scoop up 20 bandits at once. As a 7-star magician, none of these bandits could hold a candle to her power. Grieve, on the other hand, faced a similar situation as his necrotic energy far outclassed any bandit that came across him. Once he released the mithril artifact ring that contained his cultivation level, the bandits found themselves unable to even come close to him, finding themselves unconscious within a few meters of him. Meanwhile, Fudge and the Shadow Orcs took a different approach to fighting these bandits. Instead of fighting them head-on, these shadows of Reborn used their illusions to trap and slowly wear down these bandits until they became mindless zombies that easily surrendered without even a second of hesitation. Once they were put in an illusion where they witnessed their own deaths 1,000 times, they were more than happy to surrender and stop the madness that they experienced. Fudge, on the other hand, used this opportunity to spread more members for the Iron Maiden religion. Those that had accepted this religion were mysteriously teleported out of the battlefield, never to be seen again, while those that refused ended up forgetting about the experience entirely. Just these 2 teams were enough to whittle down the bandits' numbers by half. And just by themselves, they could have easily defeated the whole horde in an hour. But then, the state troopers and the reformed prisoners also helped in defeating the bandits. The centaurs rushed to the front line, trampling any bandit that was unfortunate enough to collide with him. And then, the Red Hobmonkey used his javelin to poke at any bandit that dared to come close to the centaur. These 2 species worked together well, becoming as effective as a single dragonborn when it came to defeating bandits. And in the back line, the Rebornian musicians played a high-paced beat, allowing each and every one of them to advance 1 star realm higher than their cultivation. This was what allowed them to overcome the bandits without using their sugar rush skill yet. While everyone was defeating bandits very easily, there was one other faction of Rebornians that were only slightly stronger than the bandits. Sleazy and the reformed prisoners were not Rebornian yet, and did not have their awakened powers. The only advantage they had were the magic buff that the musicians were giving them. As bandits and former bandits clashed, some of them eventually recognized Sleazy's face. "Sleazy, we thought you died," said one of the bandits. It wasn't long before the bandits recognized these other prisoners in an orange jumpsuit. These were all the bandits that disappeared, thought to have been killed by Reborn. "What's happening? Why did you all side with the Rebornians?" Sleazy looked at his former comrades and pleaded with them. "Surrender now. You don't need to do this. We have all found salvation in the hands of the Rebornians." As they clashed, knives against knives, Sleazy began to narrate about everything they experienced in the Rebornian prisons. He told them all about the great living conditions they had there, much better than living in a cave. Of course, many had doubts, but some were starting to believe it. "Brother," one of the bandits said, looking at his best friend on the other side of the battle, "is it true?" The man in a prisoner uniform nodded. "Everything and more. In Reborn, I can have anything I would ever need without killing or robbing anybody." Eventually, all the other prisoners began telling their personal stories to the bandits. It became so much more believable now that all of them were speaking about their own experiences. "Really? Free food and housing? That's all I've ever wanted," said one of the bandits, slowly lowering his knife. And he wasn't the only one. More and more bandits started to lower their knives, wanting to surrender and experience the same things that these prisoners told them. However, the sound of fire crackling from behind them immediately scared them straight. They couldn't surrender. They feared Blazelle and what she could do to them, or more importantly, what FlareCorp could do to their organization. They still didn't have the courage. Was this the bastard bandits that I created? A bunch of cowards. Suddenly, a heavy voice echoed out from the forest. The rest of the bastard bandits all looked around, having recognized that timbre of voice. Eventually, a large burly man wearing an orange jumpsuit walked forward, revealing himself to every bandit. "No way. That's Deathclaw." The original founder of the bastard bandits had shown himself after years of being thought of as dead. Not only that, but he returned as part of the Reborn company. That was the final straw. The bandits finally found a reason to surrender. They slowly lowered their knives, in fear and in awe at Deathclaw's feet. Chapter 380, Rejecting Fear. As the last of the bastard bandits finally surrendered to Reborn, it seemed that all was finally over. But just as the Rebornians were about to celebrate, the cave suddenly erupted once again as a large fire burst out from the opening and spread outwards, burning anything that came close to it. "My anger hath no bounds." The sound of Blazelle's fury echoed through the forest, sending chills down the bandit's spine. Deathclaw immediately put himself in front of them, assuring them of their safety. "Our Rebornian officers are much stronger than me. They will protect you now that you are part of Reborn." The sounds of organized footsteps echoed out of the cave as an entire army of FlareCorp soldiers marched out. These were all Blazelle's personal army, numbering 200 men, all with a 5-star star realm. Their power radiated out of the cave, but nothing came close as Blazelle herself soon stepped out into the open with a blazing fire engulfing her entire body. Blazelle wore an orange, flaming armor that accentuated her curves. With her jet black hair and fair features, she would have been called a beauty if not for the frown on her face. "How is this possible?" she screamed. She could not understand how these Rebornians keep on disturbing her plans. They had somehow triumphed against these bastard bandits under her control. Reborn was supposed to be a small country bumpkin company, yet their power far exceeded what she could have ever anticipated. Not only that, but as she looked around the forest, she saw the bastard bandits surrendering to the enemy despite them still having the numerical advantage. "Bastard bandits! Have you forgotten what FlareCorp has offered you? Glory and power would have been within your grasp if only you had been loyal to our company." Beside her was Wayno, the one-armed leader of the bastard bandits, or at least those that were still part of the group which could now be counted in 2 hands. Wayno looked around and eventually spotted Deathclaw. Surprise filled his face, but he eventually shook his head. "Why have you surrendered to Flare Corp?" Deathclaw asked. "The bastard bandits used to represent freedom. Now you're mere slaves to them." Wayno stomped his foot on the ground. "Things have changed since you left. We prioritize survival above all else. I prioritize the group above all else. Flare Corp is the future. We have to stand by them." Deathclaw shook his head. The man made his choice. There was nothing he could do about it. Blazelle was about to unleash the fury of her soldiers onto Reborn, when all of a sudden, she noticed something or someone within their midst. With her very small stature and those beating wings, there was no mistaking it. "A fairy. I have never seen one before in my life," Blazelle muttered. Excitement started to fill her face. This was one of the moments she had been waiting for. This was part of the reason why she wanted to be in this forest in the first place. She wanted the fairies. "I do not know what these Rebornians have offered you, but know that our Flare Corp can offer you more." She knew exactly what fairies loved. "Men, fear me," she commanded. As soon as she uttered those words, the 200 soldiers under her command started to cower in fear. Their boots started quaking, their knees started buckling. They were starting to remember the intense torture and practice that they went under in order to become a soldier for Flare Corp. All of those memories turned into fear, and it was something that a fairy like Vivi could sense vividly. An overwhelming sense of fear clouded the entire forest, almost making Vivi feel almost intoxicated. She was like a dog who had been starved for water in the desert, only for now to see an entire ocean in front of her. Her instincts as a fairy told her to go with the fear and consume it for her sustenance. In fact, if any other fairy had been here, they would have already fallen for Blazelle's tricks. No amount of self-discipline could change the biological need of a fairy for the fear emotion. "I want you to abandon Reborn and side with us. If you do, then I promise you and your entire race could feast on as much fear as you want to," Blazelle said, with her voice becoming alluring and seductive. Vivi slowly flew towards the scared Flare Corp army. Yuna tried to go after her, but Lilia took her hands and stopped her. "Why? We can't let her be lured in by them." Lilia held her hands. "Trust in her," she said. Meanwhile, a smile was starting to break out in Blazelle's face, as she saw that her tricks were working on the fairy. She didn't think it could be this easy. Now, all she needed was for this fairy to point her in the direction of their queen. Then Blazelle could finally get out of this godforsaken place. "Tell this to your pixie queen. Flare Corp is willing to give you all the fear you want. In exchange, we want your undying loyalty to our company, as well as the remaining God-forged piece in your possession." Vivi floated closer to the soldiers, seemingly out of her mind and completely entranced with wanting to consume fear. "How about it?" Blazelle asked. "Once you've had your fill, scram and find me your queen." Just when Blazelle thought the fairy would indulge on its greatest desires, she suddenly heard laughter echo across the forest. "Hi hi. Hee hee hee. Hi 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 hee hee." Vivi started laughing maniacally, surprising Blazelle. "What's the matter with you?" "Me," Vivi said, still chuckling. "I just realized something." Vivi looked back at the Rebornians, at Yuna, at Lilia, and the Dragonborns. A sense of warmth filled her heart. It was something that she had been feeling every time that she interacted with these people. And somehow, after seeing an abundance of fear ready for the taking, Vivi didn't feel an ounce of longing for it. She already felt full, despite not consuming any emotions for the past few days. It almost seemed impossible, until she realized that instead of consuming emotions, she was instead experiencing it for the first time in her life. She felt something for Reborn and its people. She wanted to experience life like they did. Fear no longer took a hold of her. "I reject your offer," she said resolutely. "The fear you create is disgusting." Vivi turned around before turning her head back. "And besides, Michael's roller coaster is much more entertaining. Hi hi." As Vivi left, only the golden dust on her wings were left behind. Blazel's face was beet red. She was embarrassed at the rejection. "What gives you the right to deny me?" she screamed. "Wayno, attack her!" The one-armed bandit raised his sword. As a peak 6-star fighter, he was the strongest individual here aside from Blazel. He disappeared from Blazel's side, only to reappear in the air behind Vivi. A magic circle appeared at the hilt of his sword, eventually turning the blade into burning, igneous rocks with cracks that showed lava underneath. As he swung his sword, he used a 6-star spell called Tunnel of the Lava Demon, creating large coal rocks around him that surrounded Vivi from all sides. The igneous blade and the coals converged towards Vivi at speeds rivaling that of a volcano's explosion. Chapter 381. Vivi's True Power. As the 6-star spell converged onto the small fairy, the contact created a large explosion that sent lava and fiery rocks flying all over the place. Wayno landed back on the ground and sheathed his sword, thinking that he had finished the job. But as the igneous rocks fell on the ground, he looked around and saw no sign of golden dust particles around, nor were there any fairy wings. "Hi, hi, hi!" A high-pitched laughter echoed in his head, making him look all around for the fairy. This was vaguely familiar. The stump on his missing hand started to ache, seemingly remembering this memory as well. Suddenly, the ground started to shake as the trees around Wayno started to unroot themselves. These trees seemed to have gained a life of their own as they stood up from the ground, dusted off the soil around them, and slowly crawled towards Wayno with their branches coming to strangle him from all sides. Wayno raised his igneous sword and cut the branches, leaving behind burning stumps on the trees' branches. But that didn't seem to stop the trees. Before Wayno could jump around and escape the enclosure of the animated trees, he suddenly found his legs being smothered by these glowing tentacles on the ground. His eyes widened. He had seen these before, at the time back when he was a low-time bandit and he still had both of his hands. He tried to set fire to the entire forest. And as soon as he did so, he saw these tentacles wrapped around his feet, preventing him from moving. And after that, he saw the silhouette of a fairy circling above his head. As Wayno looked around, he saw the same silhouette that he saw in his memory. But that couldn't be possible, he thought. After all, that was when he encountered the Pixie Queen and suffered her wrath, ending with him losing his right hand. And soon that realization came to dawn on him.
"No,"
he muttered. "That can't be. You're the..." But before he could finish his sentence, mushroom spores were suddenly blasted on his face and completely immobilized him from head to toe. Just like that, a 6-star swordsman was down on the ground. Blazel's face was filled with disbelief. Even the Rebornians were caught stunned with this sudden show of power. "What the hell? Vivi is that strong?" Zion muttered, shaking his head. "She's an even better lazy person than me. She hid her power to slack off the entire time." Jaka praised, almost clapping his hands. The only ones who seemed to have a clue about Vivi's true power were Lilia and Grieve. "I knew it," Lilia muttered to herself. "I always felt that her mana was far too big to just be a simple fairy. Ho ho ho. I knew as well, but I completely forgot that this wasn't normal ho ho ho." Umisu, Shiina, and Yuna approached Vivi. "You're the Pixie Queen?" Shiina asked, putting the pieces together. "I never knew you were that strong. That's so cool," Umisu said with stars in her eyes. "You're not mad?" Vivi asked. "I didn't want to tell you because I just wanted to be a normal fairy." "It's fine," Yuna said. "We all have secrets. What's important is that you're still the Vivi that we know." "Hi hi. Of course." Meanwhile, Blazel almost exploded out in anger as she saw Wayno get one-shot by a mere fairy. She had completely underestimated her, thinking that she was just a low-ranked demi-human. "You're the Pixie Queen. I should have known," Blazel roared. "This means that you have the God-forged piece." Vivi turned to Blazel and stuck out her tongue. "Even if I did have it, I wouldn't give it to you." This seemed to have fueled Blazel's anger even more. "You're telling me you'll give that God-forged piece to these country bumpkins? What an extreme waste. You don't know the true value of that thing. None of you do." I am the only magnetic person here. I deserve that God-forged peace. Blazelle's anger rose as she thought about how such a treasure would only end up in the hands of people who didn't know its true worth. In her eyes, it was a waste. Cuckoo. It's fine. Blazelle laughed maniacally. It'll end up in my hands anyway once I conquer the Reborn company once and for all. Men, sacrifice yourselves for me and bring victory to Flare Corp. As soon as she gave the word, the 200 soldiers started marching in perfect rhythm towards the Rebornians. Their powers were completely in sync, allowing them to showcase power that transcended that of a 5-star power, and even that of a 6-star power. Each and every one of their feet started to glow as a magic circle appeared beneath their soles. Soon, a large fire engulfed their very bodies that increased the temperature enough to turn water into steam. However, this fire seemed to backfire against the soldiers as they started to suffer burns on their skin. Despite that, they continued moving forward, marching to the rhythm. Their individual fires eventually combined as it billowed up high into the skies, burning the forest and everything it touched. As it consumed, it started to form into the shape of a bird, but not just any bird. It was the legendary phoenix. The phoenix rose up from the ground and circled the skies. Its mere presence turned the ground into a fiery hell. Fortunately for the Rebornians, their lesser unity defense prevented them from being burned. Cow! The mighty phoenix roared at them before diving down, intending to burn anything that it came into contact with. This phoenix had the combined strength of an 8-star spell. It was not something that even the Rebornians could face. Shadow orcs appeared beside all the Rebornians, offering to transport them to a safe location away from the fight. But strangely, they didn't. As the phoenix dove down towards the Rebornians, a large vine whose thickness was the size of an elephant rose from the ground and slapped the phoenix back into the skies. Cow! Lilia stood her ground, scoffing at the phoenix. She herself was a 7-star magician and could hold her ground against a poorly created spell such as this. But this wasn't the end as the phoenix circled the skies, soaking up all the flames and fire that the 200-men army was conjuring up on their bodies. Eventually, it received enough energy to have another go-around at the Rebornians. But this time, a certain clicking sound was heard echoing through the forest. Ho ho ho! This sound was none other than ribs clacking from Greaves' skeleton body. Has my time finally come to shine? He asked as he removed the mithril artifact ring on his finger. As soon as the limiter was removed, a burst of necrotic energy exploded out of Greave. The greenery and plant life around him started to wither away just from his very presence. Even the high temperature in the air was starting to wither, cooling down until condensation formed. Greave gripped the air, holding a non-existent sword in his hand. As he looked up at the phoenix, he simply raised his hand and brought it down with such gentle force that it could not even cut a leaf falling from a tree. And suddenly, the phoenix in the skies was split in half. It started to wither at the line where its body separated, soon turning its fiery flames into nothing but ashes that scattered in the wind. Just like that, a powerful 8-star spell was destroyed. Blazelle backed away in horror as she realized the power that this skeleton man held. 9-star? She shouted. Chapter 382. None of you. All 200 of her soldiers felt the backlash of losing the phoenix. Their bodies were inundated with burns and blisters. Blazelle could only watch on with bated breaths at the skeleton monster amidst the Rebornians. The magic that it possessed was something that transcended even that of an 8-star spell, meaning that it had probably reached the coveted 9-star realm. She couldn't believe it. Why would such a strong creature side with a no-name company like Reborn? It could have been recruited by the best of the best, getting competitive offers from the top conglomerates in the world. Meanwhile, the Dragonborns took this opportunity to whittle down the enemy forces. These soldiers count as 2 points, right? Zion said, rushing towards the Flare Corp soldiers with his gauntlets glowing with the dark mana. I'm right behind you, Jaka said, becoming a blur of lightning that crashed through the organized lineup of soldiers. These 2 Dragonborns unleashed their powers, with the soldiers trying their hardest just to defend against them. The soldiers manifested magic circles on their bodies, creating a unified defensive spell that created a land of lava on the ground. Magma spewed out of the ground, burning everything it touched except for the soldiers who casted them. Zion punched the air, cracking the very space underneath it and blowing away the lava on the ground. As he landed, the lava tried to crawl back to engulf him, but he took this time to punch away any soldiers beside him. They raised their flaming swords, trying to defend against him, yet they were blown away from the power all the same. Meanwhile, Jakku turned into lightning as he buzzed through the enemy lines, electrifying anyone he touched. His method to avoid the lava was through simply running on top of it so fast before it was able to burn him. Any soldiers that tried to lunge their swords at him ended up being caught by the blue lightning, paralyzing them for a good few seconds. Dum, 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 dum. Dum, dum. The sounds of the Rebornian musicians played in the background, empowering the two male dragonborns. Still, there were just 2 of them against 200. They were starting to get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of bodies they threw at them. 3 soldiers were able to come close to Zion, performing a fiery hands, and grasping at his arms to prevent him from escaping away. Of course, his prismatic shield extinguished their flaming hands, nullifying their effects. And just as they grasped his arms, he simply shrugged and performed an uppercut, blasting them all away into the skies unconscious. However, this gave 2 sneaky soldiers who burst out from the lava underneath the ground, lunging their swords at Zion's unprotected backside. Just then, thwump! A timely arrow deflected the swords away and disarmed the 2 would-be assassins. Zion quickly turned around and did a quick 1-2 punch, defeating the 2 soldiers and pushing them to the other soldiers. He looked behind him and saw Shiina on the backlands. If it weren't for her, he could have been injured. But instead of being thankful, Zion stuck out his tongue before continuing to punch the soldiers coming at him. On the other side of the battlefield, a large number of soldiers were getting sucked up by a tornado that ravaged their surroundings. In the middle of this disaster was Amisu, whose swings allowed the tornado to become stronger. As the soldiers got sucked into the wind, a blue lightning suddenly entered the eye of the tempest and empowered it with electricity, turning it into a thunderstorm. The combination of Jakku and Amisu turned out to be a deadly one. Blazelle gritted her teeth as she looked at the dragonborns. Their cultivations were definitely weak, yet their power could stand toe-to-toe with her elite soldiers. They definitely proved a major problem for her. Not only that, but there was also a human girl with them that clearly outclassed her soldiers when it came to swordplay. Yuna cleverly disarmed her opponents with her quick and unpredictable rapier, before knocking them unconscious by hitting their heads with her hilt. These 5 Rebornians had already proven to be an equal match against these 200 elite Flare Corps soldiers. But it turned out that they weren't even the biggest problem. The mature woman called Lilia was a 7-star earth magician capable of summoning vines that destroyed the army's position with just 1 swing. And Blazelle didn't even understand how some of her soldiers were voluntarily surrendering after being touched by an unassuming violet slime in the battlefield. And perhaps the 2 most dangerous beings in the entire forest were the 9-star skeleton monster and the fairy who turned out to be the pixie queen. Those 2 were apex creatures that Blazelle had no way of defeating. The worst part was that these creatures weren't even moving. They didn't have to. They were letting the other Rebornians dismantle the elite Flare Corps 200-men army. The combined powers of the Rebornians whittled down the numbers of Blazelle's elite escorts. As they went down in numbers, their overall strength got weaker and weaker, allowing the Rebornians to overcome the disadvantage of having the smaller army. These 205-star soldiers were reduced to a measly 50 men. At this point, the only thing they could do was surrender. Their swords sputtered out as its flames were extinguished, before these soldiers kneeled on the ground and raised their hands. How? How is this possible? Blazelle cursed the heavens. What is Reborn? When she arrived in this part of the Queen's region, she thought that she would easily conquer it and pave the way for Flare Corps dominance. Yet, the presence of this unknown Reborn company destroyed all her plans. Despite coming from the backwoods, countryside part of the royal continent, they seemed to be backed with immense strength, money, and influence. That shouldn't have been possible. They weren't even a sub-company from a conglomerate. As defeat soon came closer and closer, a sense of indignation filled Blazelle's heart. She didn't want to accept it. However, the presence of the Pixie Queen and the skeleton monster proved to be too insurmountable for her. Even her obolites and her diva couldn't save her from their overwhelming power. She knew would lose this battle, but that didn't mean Reborn would win. "Do you surrender?" Zion shouted at Blazelle. "Cuckoo," Blazelle chuckled. "You think that you'll win this battle against us?" Shiina stepped forward. "You look to be on the brink of defeat. We know we'll win." Blazelle whipped her head back and laughed maniacally, seemingly becoming insane. "You may defeat me, but that doesn't mean that you'll win against FlareCorp. What do you think will happen after they find out I lost? They'll bring their entire force to destroy your measly little company into the ground." Yuna whipped her rapier to the side, ridding it of all the blood that gathered in her blade. "And we'll defeat them too," she said confidently. "Ha ha ha. You're all naive. Naive, I tell you. None of you know what true power looks like. Even if you have a 9-star monster in your midst, they will still be dwarfed by the true strength of a powerful magnetic. You think that you can contend with the inheritors and the conglomerates of the world. Keep dreaming. They are not even playing in the same field as you. None of you can succeed, for you are all not worthy to be chosen by the mighty metal of the gods." It was at that moment that a single footstep rang out in the forest. A golden-haired boy looked up at Blazelle and smiled. Chapter 383. Michael appears. "Is that what you think?" A voice rang out and reached Blazelle's ears. She looked around, unable to recognize this voice. It wasn't from any of the Rebornians that she saw today. Just then, her eyes eventually landed onto a golden-haired boy at the very back. He was wearing light tunic clothes and leather armor. He looked unassuming. Despite that, the entire mood of the battlefield changed upon his appearance. Everyone in the Rebornian side lightened up as soon as they looked back and saw this boy walking towards them. "Boss," said the Rebornian musicians, respectfully putting down their instruments. "Bro Mike, you're finally here. You missed all the fun, man," Zion said, quickly zooming over to his side. "My dearest son, where have you been? You let Yuna fight all these soldiers alone. That's not very gentlemanly like," Lilia said, immediately hugging Michael tightly and pinching his cheeks. "Where were you?" Yuna asked with her hands behind her back. There was a hint of disappointment in her voice, something that Michael didn't seem to pick up on. "I was just talking to Virian, Vivi's mother." Vivi suddenly buzzed in front of Michael. "You went to see my mother? What did she say?" Michael squinted as he stared at Vivi. "I should have known you were the Pixie Queen," he said. "Teehee." It was at this point that Blazelle finally put together facts. "You're the boss, Michael," she said, with an obvious tone of disbelief. She was almost chuckling as she said it. Such a young boy was in control of Reborn, the company that had brought her to her knees and on the brink of loss. She almost wanted to laugh at the absurdity. You're the leader of Reborn." Michael finished catching up with the Dragonborns and the Rebornians. He floated over closer to Blazelle and nodded at her question. "That's right. I am." "What? Were you too scared of us and only now showed yourself when you know you've won?" she asked, laughing. "Not really," Michael replied. "I was just finishing up on my training." Blazelle shook her head. "No matter what kind of training you do, FlareCorp will remain supreme. Either you kill me or you take me captive. They will come for me and destroy you," she said confidently. Michael crossed his arms and smiled, with the Dragonborns and all the Rebornians behind him flashing a confident smile as well. "We'll manage," he replied. "Humph. You won't get to hide under your 9-star skeleton monster every time. None of you will be enough. The times have changed. The balance of power has shifted. Magic is not the reigning source of power that rules this world. You can't keep your little company afloat in a sea of big sharks. It will become nothing but fodder for the true contenders of this world. If FlareCorp is not the one to swallow you up, an even bigger monster will. You can mark that as true." Despite painting such a grim future for Reborn, Michael wasn't fazed by her words at all. It's only because of your ignorance that allows you to remain confident in your strength, she said, turning her head away from Michael in distaste. Michael spread his hands. Show me, he challenged her. Blazel was spurred on by his confidence. She wanted to shatter it by showing him a kind of power that he and anyone here had never seen before. Well then, let me show you a peek of the true measure of strength that this world follows. Blazel balled up her fists and took out the rapier from its scabbard. Its metallic sheen shined with a magical power, similar to that of the mithril artifacts that the Rebornians had. However, this weapon's magical power seemed dull and weak in comparison. She held a mithril relic, not to be confused by a mithril artifact. This was salvaged from the past and refitted for the present. Because of that, its power was weaker than the original. As she held it in her hands, Blazel's entire body began to burst into flames. As she got angrier and angrier, concentrating her emotions into power, the flames continued to rise up. Despite the flames and heat emanating from Blazel, there was not an ounce of mana coming out of her. Everything was powered by something completely alien and unknown. Rah! Blazel grunted before shoving her rapier into the skies, focusing the flames into her blade. Michael watched as her flames rose up to the rapier, eventually getting absorbed into its very metal. As the power focused onto her mithril relic, the shimmering figure of a flaming creature soon appeared hovering above her. I call upon you, my diva, she screamed. The flames on the diva burst forth into reality, no longer becoming just a visual projection. The fire flickered, forming a vaguely muscular torso, 2 flaming arms on its side, and a head with billowing short fire as its hair. Blazel's diva didn't have much of a distinct feature on its body, being made out of pure flames only. The most definite characteristic was found on its head, specifically, its forehead where its eyebrows were formed from igneous lava rocks and slanted to show a frustrated and angry expression. As Blazel raised her rapier in the skies, the diva above her roared in a similar fashion, with its fire billowing out even more. This is a diva, Blazel presented. The Rebornians in front of her all showed a shocked expression. They could feel no mana coming from that diva creature, yet they could clearly feel its power emanating in the air, increasing the temperature to an uncomfortable level. What is that? Shiina asked, worry plastered on her face. I don't know. Yuna answered, unsure as well. Lilia frowned as she looked at the diva. Even she was unfamiliar with this creature. Do you see now the power that I hold? She asked, with her diva flaring up as it glared at the Rebornians. My diva is unaffected by normal magic. My abilities cannot be defended against spells or skills. Then, Blazel turned to Vivi. I'll give you a last chance. If you give the Godforge piece to me, then I will make sure that FlareCorp spares you and your species. If you give it to me, then I will transcend my current cultivation and achieve the 3rd stage of body formation. My diva will become more distinct and my abilities will further develop. Come and side with the victors. Blazel's diva certainly proved to be a strange force that unsettled the Rebornians. Yet Vivi was certain in her choice. Just as Vivi was about to fly out and finish Blazel once and for all, Michael raised his hand and motioned for her to stop. Vivi looked at Michael and noticed something peculiar around his chest area. A smile formed on her lips before chuckling. Blazel saw Michael's hand and felt offended. Even after showing him the power of her diva, he still seemed unfazed and unafraid of her. There was even a hint of fascination in his eyes as he observed her diva. I may be weak enough to be defeated by your forces, but does not mean the same for FlareCorp. You cannot win against someone with a diva. Her words soon trailed off as she saw a shimmering image starting to appear above Michael's head. Chapter 384. You have a diva. The image of Michael's disembodied diva appeared hovering above his head. Its robotic hand had futuristic features that looked just like complicated metal contraptions that Blazel had no way of understanding. Blazel slowly backed away from Michael. There was no mistaking it. That was a diva. How do you have a diva? She screamed out. She had thought that only chosen people could become magnetic. Only people like her could have the talent and luck to become one of the leading powers of the world. Yet somehow, this golden-haired boy casually revealed that he had a diva all along. Where? It was then that she remembered that the fairies had a Godforge piece in their possession. That was how he must have obtained his own diva. But still, that didn't explain how he became a magnetic. After all, she was only able to become one after a gruesome and risky operation that transplanted the Godforge piece directly into her heart. As far as she knew, only those healers from the conglomerate Sinclair's elixirs could perform such a risky task without killing the person. And where's your mithril relic? The only reason she could manifest her diva was because of the rapier that she held in her hands. It was a mithril relic slathered in the oil of old, allowing her to focus the power in the Godforge piece into the diva. Without it, she wouldn't have been able to draw upon her diva's power, much less manifest it in reality. However, Michael clearly didn't have a mithril relic in his hands. He had nothing, no weapons, no metal armor, and not even a single tool. Yet somehow, he could manifest his diva without it. Everything she was seeing about Michael completely contrasted what she was taught about diva and magnetics. "Bro, Mike, what's that? That's so cool," Zion said, jumping up and down in excitement. "I knew Boss could do anything," Jaka said, leaning his sword on his shoulder. "Master, that's so ninja," Fudge praised. "Fufufu, look at how talented my son is," Lilia bragged. "You made me worried there," Yuna chuckled, staring at Michael's back with a certain look on her face. The appearance of Michael's diva completely annihilated the worry on their faces. Seeing him contrast Blazel's own diva gave them a sense of hope, not only for this battle, but for the battle that was to come in the future. "You said that our Reborn company can't keep up with the sharks of the world." "I beg to differ," Michael said, pointing his finger up at his diva. "I'm more than capable of it." Blazel gritted her teeth. "TSK, it doesn't matter how you got one. I can see that yours is still underdeveloped." The fact that Michael's diva only showed a hand meant that his progress in body formation couldn't have been more than the first stage. And she was right. "Let me guess. You just awakened your diva, right? You think that you can defeat me or my cousin with that? You haven't even awakened your ability." The unexpected appearance of Michael's diva made Blazel a little unsettled. But as she realized the immature state it was in, she started to regain her confidence. She slowly fixed her posture, turning it upright. The flaming diva above her head frowned even deeper as it stared at the diva above Michael. "I bet you don't even know what an ability is," Blazel taunted. "Would you like me to show you, little boy?" Michael smiled. "I do want to see how I stack up against someone like you. You said that you're in the second stage of body formation, right?" Blazel nodded, hiding the fact that she was still unnerved from the fact that he knew about body formation. "That's right. I am an ultra genius that was capable of awakening my ability as soon as I ascended the second stage of body formation. Just look at my diva," she said, pointing upwards. "My diva has formed most of its body. Unlike yours. Do you dare to fight me without any one of your allies helping you?" she asked, specifically looking over to the skeleton monster standing relaxed behind Michael. "Of course. I swear that this is a one-on-one fight between us." "Give me your best shot," Michael replied. Blazel's smile warped, sensing a chance. If she could defeat Michael, she could turn the tides and even possibly win the bout against the Rebornians. She immediately moved her body, swinging her rapier in accordance to the stances she learned. With each thrust of her rapier, the fiery diva above her head swung its arms and created fire in its wake. Finishing her final stance, Blazel immediately thrusted her rapier towards Michael. However, it was clear that the distance between them was far too wide for her weapon to hit him. But she didn't care. The fiery diva ballooned up twice its original size before it raised both its hands and slammed it towards Michael. Michael immediately took a step back just as the diva's arms crashed onto the ground, creating a fiery crater that turned everything into glowing igneous rocks. At this very moment, a strange mark appeared on the ground where the diva's hands landed. It was a cartoonish image of a flame with a stick for its hands and legs, looking mad and angry. Michael noticed that this image wasn't made out of mana, unlike everything in the world. "Oh, you've noticed it, have you?" Blazelle said ominously. "Too bad you have no idea what it does." She lunged her rapier again towards Michael, with her diva thrashing the ground as it tried to hit Michael. Michael dashed away from the two of them using a simple air dash spell in his feet. However, Blazelle rushed towards him again, this time thrusting her rapier multiple times in a single second. Each of Blazelle's thrusts missed their mark, hitting the trees and the boulders behind Michael. The diva above her head continued to thrash on the ground, leaving behind that mark of that anthropomorphic cartoon flame. Eventually, everything around him was inundated with these marks on the ground. And as he stepped backwards, he inadvertently came too close to one of the marks on the tree. Blazelle smiled as the mark suddenly exploded out into a fiery mess. Michael dodged from getting hit directly, but the shockwave pushed him just enough for him to come close to another mark on a large boulder. That mark exploded as well, sending chunks of fiery rock all over the forest. Michael quickly used a magic spell, creating a wall of water to protect himself from the shooting debris. Blazelle laughed maniacally, lunging at Michael's water wall. As soon as her rapier made contact with the water wall, the same mark appeared on the water spell's surface. Michael's eyes widened as his own magic exploded out into fiery flames, almost hurting him from being too close. "What? How did water get turned into flames?" Zion shouted as he saw what happened. "Something's weird. Those flames aren't made out of mana." Shiina noticed. Blazelle laughed. "That's right. This is my ability. I can make anything explode out into a fire with anything I touch, or my diva touches. Your magic spells are of no use. I'll turn them into my own bombs, ha ha ha." Chapter 385. Blazelle's ability. Michael knew that abilities weren't affected by normal spells or mana. However, it was still jarring to see his own water spell get turned into a fiery bomb that set off whenever he got too close. "You have nowhere to hide," Blazelle shouted madly. She rushed towards him, thrusting her rapier at his side. If he moved to the side, he would come into close proximity into one of the fire bombs she left behind earlier. If he didn't move, then his own skin would get turned into one of those bombs. A magic circle appeared on Michael's shoes as he propelled air out of his soles, flying him up and away from the bombs in the forest. High up above the crowns of the trees, he looked down at Blazelle. "These marks of yours, they'll explode as soon as I come close to it?" he asked. "How close exactly?" "Haha, I don't mind telling you. Right now, if you come as close as a person's height within one of my flame marks, it will explode. And don't think that you can escape from me in the air," she said as she thrusted her rapier in the air. Suddenly, each of her thrusts created flame marks that remained stationary in the air, right where the tip of her sword landed. And with a simple blow from her, those marks flew up towards Michael like dandelion fluffs. Michael conjured a magic circle in his hands, creating a huge gust of wind that tried to push the flame marks back down. However, they seemed to be unaffected by the air mana that he conjured. Abilities are unaffected by mana, Michael reminded himself. As the flame marks came near him, the air suddenly exploded into a billowing fire that threatened to consume him. Michael air-dashed away to safety, but as the cloud dispersed into the air, he suddenly noticed that he was surrounded by more flame marks everywhere. Blazelle had continued to create mark after mark in the air, letting them all float towards Michael. But thankfully, Michael had seemed to find a sweet spot within the minefield of flame marks in the air. As long as he didn't move a single inch, then he wouldn't trigger any of the explosions. "Now you're making me mad," Blazelle growled from the ground. "That's bad news for you." Just then, Michael saw one of the flame marks right next to him start to blink rapidly, a sign that it was about to blow. "I forgot to tell you that as I get angrier and angrier, my flame marks become more impatient and require less separation to trigger. Oh, and it increases intensity too." Michael raised his hand and protected himself as the flame mark exploded into flames, with the shockwave just enough to send him flying towards the entire minefield of flame marks in the air. The entire skyline of the forest turned orange as a domino effect of explosions rang out from above. Fire burned in the air despite the lack of any combustible material there. Blazel's ability didn't follow the rules of physics nor magic. Michael braced himself as fire consumed him from all around. Blazel's ability flames were starting to eat away at his unity defense, burning his skin for the first time in his life. As the fire fizzled out, Michael emerged from the cloud of smoke with his clothes a bit tattered and burned. But still, he looked relatively unharmed except for a few burn marks on his skin. I don't know how you're still alive, but this isn't the extent of my powers. Blazel tapped her foot on her rapier, creating 2 special flame marks on her feet. As she clicked her heels together, an explosion of flames propelled her upwards like a rocket, reaching Michael's position within just a few seconds. With her rapier pointed at Michael head-on, her diva bellowed out in larger flames and tried to strangle the robotic hand above Michael's head. Michael raised his hand, magic circle in palm, and conjured a ball of fire even bigger than that of Blazel's diva. It reached the size of an elephant. As she came towards him, he threw the ball of fire towards her with the power equivalent to that of a 6-star spell. Blazel's diva frowned even deeper as it welcomed this ball of fire. As Blazel pierced through the ball of fire with her rapier, she swung her weapon around a couple of times and created more and more flame marks inside the ball of fire. Within just a second, the flame marks exploded and consumed the ball of fire with its own flames. A weird phenomenon occurred as fire mana began to be consumed and burned by a different fire that didn't follow the rules of magic. Eventually, Michael's ball of flames was turned into mere flickers of mana before fizzling out of existence. Your mana is useless against abilities, Blazel triumphantly shouted. I'll show you that no matter how strong your spells are, it is no use against magnetics like me. Floating in front of Michael, Blazel swung her rapier around. The diva above her thrashed its arms around, creating multiple stacks of flame marks with each and every swing. These marks became like a spread-out deck of cards as it flew around the air. There must have been hundreds of them per stack. With a single thrust of her rapier, the flame marks shot towards Michael like birds of prey hunting their meal. As Michael flew away from the flame marks, he conjured up 8 different magic circles in the sky. Each one was made out of a different element. A fiery dragon emerged out of one of his magic circles. A dragon made out of water emerged from the next. Eventually, 8 dragons were conjured made out of all the elements known to man. Each one was a 6-star spell, which Michael could only do with his near-limitless mana capacity. These dragons swam through the air and intercepted the stacks of flame marks, making them explode prematurely. Michael noted that none of the dragons did particularly well against the flame marks. Elemental advantage does not exist within abilities, he thought to himself. You can't escape, Blazel screamed as she pursued Michael, creating several more stacks of flame marks in the air. There must have been tens of thousands of them now, all flying towards Michael. Thankfully, the upgraded 6-star air flight spell allowed him to just barely outrun the flame marks. By now, he must have circled around the entire circumference of the forest. He looked back at Blazel with the thousands of flame marks surrounding her, and looked at the diva above her head. Blazel's diva has lost approximately 25% of the flame's intensity throughout the fight, ChatJK aforementioned, which means that those flame marks are not endless. She's using up her own diva to create them, he added. All this time, he had just been wasting time in order to get more information out of Blazel's diva. He wanted to know how it worked, and its weakness if it had one. After all, this was the only practice he would get against another magnetic. He had to savor these moments. Stop running away, Blazel screamed. As her anger ran rampant, the intensity of her diva's flames got stronger. It seemed that her emotions played a big part in the manifestation of her abilities. The flame marks turned even bigger and flew even faster than before. According to ChatJK4, they would catch up to him soon. He decided that there was one final test he needed. He raised his hand and used his trusted Unity gun and aimed it at her diva. Chapter 386. Blazel pushed to the brink. As the power of unity gathered at the tip of his hands, a Desert Eagle gun manifested on his diva's hand and pointed it straight at Blazelle and her diva. A sense of fear appeared on Blazelle's face. But when she looked closer upon Michael's unity gun, she realized that she had been overthinking it. That was not an ability, but just a simple magical spell that needed mana to be used. Here I thought you were using your ability. What was I thinking? You're just in the first stage. Blazelle chuckled. Do you still not get it? Mana is nothing compared to abilities. She immediately thrusted her rapier multiple times in the air, creating more and more stacks of flame marks in the air. Just like before, these flame marks glided through the air as they hunted down Michael, never minding the glowing light at the end of his fingertips. But at that very moment, Michael fired his unity gun and created a bright light that blinded Blazelle for just a single moment. And when she opened her eyes, she looked up at Michael and saw his fingertips smoking from the shot. The diva above his head rolled the gun on its finger, creating a satisfying click as it reloaded another shot. Strangely though, the flame marks that she sent towards his way all soon lost their momentum and dissipated into ashes. What? Just as she said that, she felt something wet drip down on her hair. She swiped it with her hand and saw that it was made out of liquid flame. As she looked upwards, her eyes soon widened as she saw her diva grasping at its chest in deep pain. It seemed to be holding an injury in its chest, keeping its own flames from leaking out. Yet some of them did, and it flowed right down towards her. My diva? How? Her connection with her diva was weakening by the second. She looked back at Michael. That thing, that light, it's made out of mana. It's not supposed to hurt a diva. That's impossible. She screamed out in denial. There was no doubt about it. The unity gun that Michael used was something that was made out of pure mana and nothing else. It was not an ability. Yet, the damage it had done to her diva was as clear as day. You monster! As Blazelle's anger reached to the high heavens, a huge burst of flames exploded out of her diva, healing its bleeding gunshot wound. It was no longer weakening, but the damage was already done. She needed sleep and nourishment for her diva to recover to its full health. You'll pay for this! She screamed, using the flame mark explosion on her feet to propel herself towards Michael. She swung her rapier, commanding her diva to slam its fist towards Michael. Michael raised his hand and aimed his unity gun at the incoming diva, with the light in his fingertips glowing with more intensity. As the fiery diva raised its locked hands, flame marks appeared right behind it that immediately exploded into a huge shockwave, speeding up its arms to slam towards Michael. But at that very moment, an instantaneous beam of pure unity shot right at its arms, cutting off its flaming fists. Arg! Blazelle screamed in pain, buckling away from Michael. Even the diva above her head opened its mouth and shouted a silent scream as its hands were destroyed into mere embers. Blazelle's head turned tomato red as she became angrier and angrier at Michael's anomaly. He wasn't supposed to hurt her diva. She was in the second stage of body formation. He just barely entered the first stage. Even in a battle of abilities, she should win against him every single time. But he wasn't even using an ability. He was only using a weird magic spell that seemed to affect magnetics and diva both. The worst part was that she saw Michael's hand glowing with power again, getting ready to fire that insanely fast beam of power at any moment. Blazelle swung her rapier up, down, left, and right, creating a spherical collection of flame marks. And as she thrusted her weapon at it, the ball of marks shot towards Michael at fast speeds. Michael fired his unity gun at this ball of marks, piercing through it without a problem and hitting Blazelle's diva all the same. Blazelle recoiled back, but she held her concentration. Her flame marks only worked if she was focused, so she kept looking at Michael and focusing her anger on the ball of flame marks. Despite being pierced through, the ball of flame marks simply unraveled to become a cloud of marks that soon enveloped Michael. Explode! Blazelle said, detonating everything. The flame marks erupted in a ball of hot flames, consuming everything in a 10-meter radius all around. The forest didn't burn from getting caught up in the explosion, it simply disintegrated. As the dust settled, the only thing that was left behind was a large crater on the ground as deep as a few meters. Blazel limped forwards, looking for any sign of Michael in the aftermath. The diva above her was noticeably less fiery than before, with its flames becoming tamer than a small campfire. She saw no sign of him anywhere, yet she didn't let down her guard. It was at that moment that she saw a flash of light at the corner of her eye. She quickly turned around, only to see Michael standing a few meters away from her, with his hand raised and his fingers smoking from the gunshot. She looked up at her diva and saw a large gap in its stomach. The flames around its body tried to patch up the injury, but it was far too big and the flames were far too weak for it to heal. The fiery diva flickered in and out of existence, before fading away like a simple projection. Blazel fell to her knees, with despair on her face. She looked down, still completely unbelieving of what was happening. "I lost?" she asked herself. "To a first stage with no ability?" Michael walked towards her, stopping just 1.5 meters away from her. "Do you surrender?" he asked her. Blazel started chuckling before turning into a maniacal laughter. "Ha ha ha ha! Reborn, reborn!" she shouted. "Do you surrender?" he asked her again. Finally, Blazel stopped laughing. She looked up at Michael and said, "Do you think that you can change me like you changed those bandits? No such thing. I am and always will be part of the mighty Flare Corp. I will sacrifice my life if I have to." It was at that moment that Blazel's skin started to change color. Red circular spots started to appear on her entire body, eventually forming into something that Michael was familiar with: flame marks. She had turned herself into a giant bomb, essentially becoming a nuke, and since he was so close to her, the flame marks started to blink faster and faster, indicating that it was about to blow. "Ha ha ha! It's too late!" she screamed. "You and your Rebornians will be engulfed in the fire of Flare Corp. The explosion would be so powerful that nobody in this forest would be able to escape from destruction." Blazel looked up at Michael, expecting to see worry and trepidation on his face. But instead, he remained calm and raised his hand. And suddenly, a metallic or unearthed itself from the ground and levitated towards Michael. Chapter 387, Michael's Ability. Pure iron metal burst out of the ground and came to where Michael beckoned. It landed right in front of him, levitating above his palms. "You can't protect yourself from this."
Abilities transcend mana.
Blazel ridiculed him. Michael looked back at her with a cheeky smile on his face. "Who says it's not?" And as Michael moved his hand, the iron metal moved along with it. Suddenly, the chunks of rock and soil that came along the or began to be chipped away by an invisible force, leaving only a crude iron metal. Blazel's eyes widened, realizing that she didn't feel the power of mana in that metal ore. It was being controlled by something cool and foreign. As the realization dawned on her, she gasped. "An ability!" she screamed out. It was at that moment that Michael's diva, the mechanical robotic hand, reached down towards Michael and grabbed the huge chunk of iron ore in front of him. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The fact that his diva was interacting with the world meant that he was currently using an ability. There was no doubt about it, but that was supposed to be impossible. First of all, he was only in the first stage of body formation. His diva was far too immature to be able to manifest its power into the real world. And secondly, he didn't wield any mithril artifact to channel the diva's power into the ability. Everything she was seeing was a complete anomaly. As Michael's diva grabbed the iron ore, its arms suddenly started to glow with lights and sounds that were completely unfamiliar to someone like Blazel. But for Michael, it was an old sight. His diva looked like one of those futuristic robots whose veins glowed with all kinds of lights and touch-screen features that only someone from his previous world could understand. And suddenly, all that power from the diva seemed to flow directly into the iron ore, making it glow reddish hot. The chunk of metal began to melt, but not before smaller limbs popped out of the diva's hands, molding it to whatever its desired shape was. Its process was very fast, almost supersonic, as the small limbs that grew out of its knuckles and palms turning into a blur as it molded the hot metal. Eventually, the metal cooled down and formed into a circular shape that had two thin wires coiled all around its back. Anyone from the nation of Reborn recognized this shape. It looked like a clock, except it only had one hand that rotated around the circle, which was ticking down every second towards the very top. This wasn't made to tell the exact time. It was made to tell how much time was left. That wasn't the only thing that's weird. There were also two suspicious wires coiled beside the clock. One was colored red and one was colored blue. Michael received this clock, made by his diva, and placed it directly on Blazel's chest. The clock glowed with a white light for a second as it enjoined itself within Blazel. "Whatever you're doing won't work," Blazel said, with the flame marks around her body continuing to blink faster and faster. In a few seconds, she was still going to explode. "Say goodbye," she said, closing her eyes and accepting her fate. The flame marks around her body blinked almost continuously as it signaled its near eruption. But at the very moment, Blazel suddenly heard a crisp sound ring out in her ears. Clip. She looked down at her body, still intact. Soon, the flame marks around her body lost its power, beginning to dissipate back into her skin. "What happened?" she shouted. She looked down and saw the strange clock that Michael attached on her chest. One of the wires on the clock had been cut. "I disarmed your bomb," Michael said to her. But how?" "I cut the red wire," he explained. Of course, she didn't know what he was talking about. But if anyone from Michael's previous world saw the combination of a clock and a jumble of wires behind it, then they would think of only one thing: a time bomb. And that was exactly what Michael had done. Blazel had already become a bomb, and all that he did was add a timer to complete the combination. Why, you ask? It was because this kind of high-stakes situation was a staple of media, movies, and television. There was always an episode where the hero would only have a few seconds left to defuse the bomb by cutting either the red wire or the blue wire. And this was what Michael did. Somehow, his diva was able to create a bomb timer that mysteriously connected to Blazel's own explosive power. And by cutting the red wire, just like in the movies, Michael was able to disarm the bomb. This was his ability. Though, if he were to be honest, he still didn't understand it completely. When he saw Blazel on the brink of self-destruction, he had made up his mind to teleport himself and everyone else out of the forest to save them. However, as he looked at her blinking flame marks around her body, he suddenly remembered the time bomb in the movies and how they could be disarmed by cutting the right wire. And suddenly, he felt the Godforge in his heart move. It was urging him. As he activated his ability, his mind went in a fugue state, half conscious and half subconscious. He felt the ability mold the iron ore into the time bomb even without his own instructions. And as its construction completed, he knew that if he put this timer onto Blazel, then he could somehow disarm her self-destruction. It worked. He didn't know how, but it worked. He just followed his gut, and his diva did all the work. How is this possible? Blazel slumped onto the ground, mentally and physically defeated. Even as a first-stage body formation magnetic, Michael was able to awaken his ability. That was unheard of. Not only that, but his ability was somehow able to overpower her ability despite her being one stage above him. She wasn't questioning how he was able to disarm her self-destruction bomb. She questioned how he was able to do it despite having a lower cultivation than her. She was taught that diva cultivation was what decided the hierarchy of the world. There were many divas that could override reality itself. Anything was possible with abilities. However, the one remaining constant that everyone followed was that only those with a higher cultivation stage could overpower another diva. Yet Michael was able to do it. "I don't understand anything anymore," she muttered, head slumped down. "I admit, you are a one-of-a-kind," she confessed. "But you should kill me now or imprison me at the bottom of the earth itself. I promise you that FlareCorp will know that I lost my battle today. It's only a matter of time until they hunt you down." Blazel opened her arms wide, accepting her fate of death. It was at that moment that Blazel felt something tug at her heart. She looked down and horror filled her face. A metallic liquid was seeping out of her skin and slowly getting sucked out of her. It was none other than the God-forged piece in her heart. Chapter 388. Sapped of Power. Blazelle felt sapped of her power even more than before. The God-forged piece that had been surgically placed inside her heart was now separating from her body, from ligament to muscle and finally out of her skin. The God-forged piece flowed out of her in liquid form just like sweat and slowly solidified into droplets as they floated over towards Michael's hands. What's happening? Blazelle felt woozy. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to vomit. The power that she had worked so hard for, the intoxicating feeling of superiority, was soon getting ripped away from her heart heartlessly. Michael's eyes widened as he saw the God-forged pieces slowly coming over towards him, speeding faster and faster as it came near him. Eventually, it shot at supersonic speed directly to his chest, bypassing all of his organs until it finally reached his heart. Blazelle's God-forged piece. It's getting attracted by my own God-forged pieces. He wasn't expecting this. He didn't even think that this was possible. It was true that all the God-forged pieces that he encountered till now had a sort of magnetic attraction towards him due to his talent of wielding the Unity Mana. It was what made him a natural magnetic, as Virion described it. However, he didn't think that it would also work for God-forged pieces that were already inside someone else. More and more droplets of God-forged pieces shot out of Blazelle's skin and transferred over to Michael. Blazelle's diva soon appeared struggling above her head. It was trying its hardest to simply exist, to keep the flames on its skin burning. Yet, as more and more God-forged pieces left Blazelle's body, her diva soon faded out of existence, never to be seen again. As the final pieces left Blazelle's heart, she felt an immense void inside her body. If becoming magnetic was akin to getting a new set of eyes that saw the world in a different light, then losing her diva was like becoming blind and losing all of her senses altogether. No, that's not possible, she muttered in defiance, shaking her head violently. She found it hard to accept this reality. This was one thing she thought she was secured out. She thought that no matter what happened to her today, she could still bounce back in the future after her diva's power had recovered. But after this, there was no diva for her to recover. Everything was gone. She couldn't feel it anymore. She looked up at Michael, who closed his eyes as the God-forged pieces entered his body. The robotic arm diva above his head manifested in reality, becoming ever so clearer than before. A white light soon enveloped Michael, pulsating as it slowly funneled all of that power upwards, towards the diva above his head. Blazelle's jaw dropped as she saw the arm grow and become realized up from the elbow and completing up to its shoulders. The mechanical robotic arm grew like nanoparticles, with its black metal wires curving upwards until it formed into the join socket of the shoulder. Futuristic circuitry formed next, becoming the meat and muscle of the arm. And as the inner workings of the diva finished, the last piece to be formed was its sleek and thin metal skin. Michael had fully unlocked his diva's right hand, right up to its shoulders. The bluish exterior of the chest and trapezius muscles showed lightly, allowing for Michael to have a sneak peek of what was to come. This meant that he had successfully advanced to the second stage of body formation. A sense of awe and horror flashed through Blazelle's eyes as she gazed at the golden-haired boy in front of her. She remembered that her grandfather told her something about people of the ancient times, about how they were all people called natural magnetic, she muttered, realizing that Michael was precisely a thing of legends. The hairs on her arm stood on end as she realized the severity of the situation for FlareCorp. They knew nothing about what they were dealing with. Everyone thought that Reborn was just a country bumpkin company that knew nothing about the world. But as it turned out, their power was something that could even threaten to topple the current hierarchy of the world. Their leader, in particular, was a man to be feared. Michael was a natural magnetic. This meant that he didn't need any surgery to obtain the Godforged pieces he needed to advance through the stages of body formation. He didn't have to assume any of the risks. It would simply be natural for him to have it. She was sure that any magnetic that was unfortunate enough to cross paths with him would have to be careful, or else they would end up in the same situation she was in. Her loss against him weakened her diva and subsequently, her control of the God-forged pieces in her heart. Because of that, It was easily swept away by the attraction of a natural magnetic. He stole her Godforge pieces and used it for his own. When she said that FlareCorp would hunt them down, she realized that she was completely wrong. Michael would hunt them down for more pieces. She wanted to warn her FlareCorp brethren and her cousin about Michael. But alas, her fate was in Reborn's hands. As the adrenaline in her body faded, her consciousness soon after, she passed out, with exhaustion finally getting the best of her. The last thing she saw was Michael grasping his hands, with the robotic arm above him copying his movements. With Blazel finally defeated, it was officially Reborn's victory in this battlefield. "Yeah, we won," Zion shouted, jumping around in happiness with Jakku and Fudge beside him. "Ho ho ho, quite a shocker. I didn't think I would see those things again. Or, at least I think so. I may have forgotten ho ho ho," Grieve said, looking at Michael's diva. The Shadow Orcs and the State Troopers quickly caught the remaining bandits and FlareCorp soldiers. Since they had already surrendered, they didn't put up a fight and followed wherever the Rebornians told them to go. The Low Shadows used their transportation ability to transfer them all over to the prison for rehabilitation. Meanwhile, everyone converged on Michael's location, congratulating him on a solid victory. "Bro Mike, what's that cool robot you have on your head?" Zion asked enthusiastically. "Zion, that's Lord Michael's secret," Shiina said, nudging her little brother. Michael raised his hand. "It's all right. I'll explain everything," he said. He then went on to tell them all about the Godforge pieces and how they were able to make him into a magnetic. He even told them about how he was only able to awaken his ability thanks to Virion, since she gave him the necessary Godforge pieces to progress. "Weird. I've never heard about this before," Yuna said, frowning. This hurt her pride, since there was something she was completely clueless about. If magnetics are so prevalent in high society, why haven't I heard about it? "It's probably because they keep a tight seal on it," he said. "Or maybe your parents were trying to hide it from you. I didn't know about it either. I've heard bits and pieces about the Godforge pieces, but never about magnetics," Lilia added. "But as expected of my son, you're a genius in every aspect. Isn't that right?" Lilia proudly hugged her son, making Michael a little bit embarrassed. Chapter 389. Figuring out Michael's ability. "Lord Michael, those exploding flame marks were Blazel's ability, right? What about yours? Is it that clock timer?" Shiina asked. Michael looked down at his chest and saw a significant increase in the area of his heart covered by the Godforge pieces. Right now, he could feel Godforge's power just hiding inside his heart. Back when he was in the first stage of body formation, he could barely feel this power. He couldn't even control it. Only through practice and with Virion's help that he was able to somehow be aware of his own abilities. However, that ability was involuntary. The reason why he didn't use his ability early in the fight against Blazel was because he didn't know how to. Only in the heat of the battle and the threat of her self-destruction did his subconscious finally activate his ability. But now, absorbing this new Godforge piece allowed him to transcend to the second stage of body formation. Because of that, he felt a substantial increase in his control over his own diva and abilities. If he wanted to, he could bring out his ability and his diva anytime that he wanted. He closed his eyes, borrowing the power of his Godforge pieces to summon his own diva. "Whoa! That's so cool! That's so ninja!" Everyone marveled at the diva above Michael's head. Zion jumped up and tried to touch the robotic hand, but found that he was unable to interact with it. His hand simply passed through the diva like it was just a visual projection. Michael concentrated his mind, replaying the feeling he had just a few moments ago. "I was able to make a bomb timer that was able to connect with Blazel's own ability." As he began to analyze how and why his ability worked the way it was, he realized something. "My ability was able to make Blazel's ability conform to a technological concept. I was able to make her conform to the concept of a modern time bomb where a circuit controlled whether a bomb was going to go off or not. Could my ability have something to do with technology?" Michael thought to himself. That seemed very much in line with what he had been doing in this world. He had always wanted to create more technological advances in the world so that comfort could be achieved universally. Perhaps, his ability was influenced by that as well. There is reason to believe that your thinking is correct. However, more data is needed to form a conclusion. ChatJK4 added. This was its way of saying that he needed to experiment more to know about the limits of his ability. If my ability has something to do with technology, then maybe I can create a smartphone. Spurred on by this possibility, Michael closed his eyes and thought deeply about smartphones. However, when he tried to think up the concept in his mind, he suddenly felt befuddled and was unable to concentrate or focus on a single thought. It was like there was something blocking his mind. Perhaps the more accurate description was that his ability wasn't advanced enough to create something advanced like a smartphone. My idea is far too complex, he thought, frowning. I need something that is much simpler. Finally, he settled on a very basic and simple form of technology that was always present back in his previous life. This was also one of the things that he implemented in this world as soon as possible. He raised his hand, and suddenly, another large chunk of iron ore burst out of the ground and floated over to his palms. As he concentrated on this concept, he felt the power in his chest start to churn. The Godforged piece was supplying him with power. His diva reached down and grabbed the iron ore, clamping on it with its mechanical fingers. Then suddenly, an upside-down L-shaped pillar grew out of the hand's backside and started to shoot out a red laser that sliced the iron ore into sharp edges. That's so cool. What are you making, bro Mike? Zion said, enthusiastically peering over the diva. Michael looked at Zion and gave him a simple instruction. I want you to create a simple fireball. Okay? You'll throw it at me whenever I say so. Zion was immediately down for it. However, Shiina quickly intervened. Lord Michael, I don't think Zion is appropriate for this mission given his propensity for being too wild. Please, let me be the one so that I can ensure your safety, she said. Hey! Zion shouted back, offended, but he didn't refute the claims. Very well. Just a simple 4-star spell will suffice, he said to Shiina. The white-scaled dragonborn nodded, putting on her game face. As the diva finished its transformation over the iron ore, the crude metal became a sharp-edged rectangular shape with a slanted triangle on top of it. Yuna immediately recognized what it was. She had used this technology millions of times before in her previous life. That's... At the very same moment, Michael nodded at Shiina and motioned for her to release the fireball spell. A giant magic circle appeared in front of her palms, concentrating the mana inside her body to form a 4-foot diameter fireball in the air. Its mere appearance increased the ambient temperature of the forest by a few degrees, giving everything a yellowish tint. Fireball! Shiina shouted, shooting the 4-star spell towards Michael. And with her precise aim, it went straight down the middle without any deviations. Perfect, Michael muttered. As the fireball shot towards him at relatively fast speeds, he took the iron contraption from his diva's hand and threw it towards the fireball. This small piece of iron metal would have melted inside this fireball. However, it seemed to have been endowed with a strange power that was impervious to normal mana. The rectangular iron contraption, no bigger than an orange, shot directly in the middle of the fireball and stopped at its dead center. Just then, a strange power emanated from the iron box and spread throughout the fireball. Suddenly, the fireball stopped in the middle of the air, completely frozen. Its momentum was stopped dead in its tracks. It stopped, Shiina said, surprised. It was at this point that Lilia came closer to the stationary fireball and noticed something more shocking. The fire mana... It's not moving, she exclaimed. The fireball seemed to have been frozen in time, with none of its flames flickering like normal. It stayed there, motionless, completely defying the laws of physics and magic. Isn't this supposed to be impossible? Jakku stared in wonder. Yuna was the only one who seemed to understand a little bit why the fireball stopped in the air. She turned to Michael. It's because of the switch, isn't it? She asked. Michael nodded. The thing that he created with his diva was a simple switch that could be flicked on or off. This was very basic technology, and was the foundation of some of the most complex creations in the modern world. As of right now, this was the only technology he could manifest with his ability. But still, he didn't expect it to be as overpowered as this. The switch could turn magical spells on or off. Chapter 390. Switch. This was a revelation. It was only now that he realized how much abilities shattered reality. It was bending it in ways that he couldn't even understand. Somehow, a simple switch with no complicated circuits with just a bunch of wires could control the flow of spells with a single flick of a button. It didn't even make sense how it worked. The wires weren't connected to the spell in any way. That is amazing. Yuna wondered at the frozen fire ball in front of her. This is the power of a diva? It's mind-blowing. What more can it do? Can it control anything? Fufufu. Michael dear, your fiancé. Your precious friend is asking you a question, Lilia said, nudging Michael towards Yuna. Let's test it out, he said to Yuna. He was extremely curious about the limits of his new ability. First of all, he concentrated on the ball of fire in front of him, connecting with the iron switch at its center. He willed it to turn back on, and suddenly, a crisp click sound echoed out of the switch. It turned on telepathically, allowing the fireball to resume its normal movement. It shot off towards Michael with the same speed and momentum as before, as if it hadn't stopped dead in its tracks just a few seconds ago. A prismatic shield appeared around him, protecting him from the 4-star spell and disintegrating its mana into nothingness. The iron switch landed perfectly in his palms, ready for it to be applied. Boss, can you stop this tree from falling? Jaku asked, unsheathing his sword and slicing a tree in half with one swift movement. A thin line appeared on the trunk of the medium-sized tree before it slowly slid off at the point where it was cut. The sound of wood splintering creaked out of the tree before it slowly toppled over. Michael quickly threw his iron switch towards the falling tree, accurately hitting it in its trunk. As the switch collided with the tree, a mysterious power emanated from metal and allowed it to be attached onto the tree. Michael quickly focused his mind, telepathically turning the switch on the off position. And as soon as the metal clicked, the tree immediately stopped falling in midair. Just like the fireball, the tree looked like it had been frozen in time. However, the leaves that fell out of the branches glided to the ground, unaffected by his switch. It seemed that his ability considered them to no longer be a part of the tree, therefore it could not be controlled. In this frozen state, Michael slowly lifted the tree up and out of its original path of descent. He noted that it did not feel heavy at all. There was still some weight to it, but it seemed to be lessened by a significant margin. He then moved the falling tree just 1 meter away into a clearing where its fall wouldn't disturb any other trees. And with a simple thought, he flipped the switch back on, letting the tree finally fall to the ground. That is very cool, boss. Even the shy Umisu couldn't help but express her amazement at Michael's abilities. Lord Michael, it seems to me that your switch is able to manipulate force, energy, momentum, turning them on and off whenever you please, Shiina explained, looking over the notes that she created. This does not conform to any physics or magic rules of the world. Of course, my son can do whatever he wants. Breaking physics and magic is a small feat for him, Lilia bragged. Michael shook his head, a little bit embarrassed. Wait a minute, he thought to himself. Can everything be affected by my switch? Who wants to volunteer for an experiment? He asked everyone, holding the switch in his hands. His experiment was easy to guess. He wanted to see if his abilities could work on a person. Can they be turned on and off just like everything else? What would that even entail? In response, everyone turned quiet. Although they were all loyal to Michael, they didn't seem all that keen to be handled through the weird power of divas. I volunteer, Zion said, enthusiastically. Michael nodded and approached the eager Dragonborn. Zion won't get hurt by this, right? According to the experiments that you have conducted, it is very unlikely for Zion's health to be affected by the switch. The tree didn't get hurt from the experiment. Even the fireball didn't lose any of its mana power. Everything returned normal after being switched on and off. You trust me, right? He asked Zion. You don't even have to ask. Bro Mike! Zion quickly snatched the switch away from Michael's hands and immediately pushed it on his own chest. The iron switch pulsated with power for a second, attaching itself to Zion's scales. You! Michael wanted to scold Zion for being too rash, but it was already done. The switch was already on him. Zion's movements stopped. Even the mana flow around his body halted, becoming completely frozen in time. Zion? Can you hear me? Michael asked, waving his hand in front of his face. A moment later, Zion's eyes suddenly darted to the side, making eye contact with Michael. And soon, his face started to twitch as moved his mouth, making the weird faces that he did whenever he wanted to joke around. More of his body twitched into life before eventually, his entire being burst into movement. Even the iron switch on his chest fell on the floor, signaling his complete break from Michael's ability. Whoa, Zion said, massaging his temples. That was weird. It felt like I was asleep and was rudely awakened. He stretched his body, feeling nothing wrong. Shiina approached Zion and quickly swatted his head. She started to lecture him about being cautious and waiting for Michael's instructions next time. It seemed that my switch does work on humans, but only temporarily, barely lasting a second. Perhaps the anatomy of a human life is far too advanced for your current abilities. ChatJK4 added. He agreed with that statement. The fact that he could freeze Zion for a moment meant that he could potentially freeze people in the future if his abilities became stronger. He then went on to do more experiments with his ability, testing all kinds of spells and mana. And as far as he could tell, the switch could affect every single one of them. However, stronger spells that were in the 8-star or higher, courtesy of Grieve, were less likely to get affected. They would break free out of his ability's control and become unfrozen in just a few seconds. He then tested out if he could create more than one switch at a time. He presented 2 more raw iron ores to his diva, who quickly went to work and gave him 2 perfectly usable switches. However, his diva refused to create another switch after that. It seemed that his limit for now was 3 switches. These 3 switches could all work simultaneously without problem, and he could easily control them telepathically without a problem. He also found out that there seemed to be no time limit for these switches. They remained active for as long as he had his diva manifested in reality. But having his diva above him at all times was a hard task. His limit was an hour. After that, he felt incredibly weak and his diva shimmered out of reality. As soon as that happened, his ability stopped working and his switches turned into normal blocks of iron.